This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Donald Trump needs a weak dollar.
Have we achieved a soft landing? Has the Fed kind of done its job?
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
The economic calendar jam-packed today.
And Michael Barr with news.
Fears over a broader regional war in the Middle East.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo. Dolphin alert off the beach. Paul Sweeney, do the Dolphins like the cold?
I don't know, but they were all over our Jersey Shore this summer and fall. So they're out there.
They're out there.
They're out there, like in size.
Cold this morning. We looked at the weather. Lots of distractions this morning. I'm reading in on Greenland. We'll get to that. But for those that matter about the markets, good morning, Global Wall Street. There's something going on here. Torsten Slok nailed it in his morning note. He says, look at yields. The Sweeney yield is up. The 30-year bond, we're on a 5% watch. 2-year yield, 4.27%. 30-year bond, 4.86%. 10-year real yield out to new high. Why, Paul? Why?
I don't know. I mean,
we don't know.
Torsten Slok's note, I wanted him to tell me why. But again, we've got rates moving higher, despite the fact that the Fed is, in fact, cutting rates here. So it just kind of goes to the underlying economic data out there, which is pretty darn solid for, I think, most folks that look at this marketplace.
Lots going on here across all that we cover. We're going to have a great set of guests. Jeffrey Hughes starts us strong here in a moment. Bloomberg Surveillance across the nation. We're brought to you by BAM Mutual. They insure municipal bonds that finance essential infrastructure and provide guaranteed income to improve any portfolio. Learn more about municipal bond credit quality. Visit bambonds.com. We spell that when it's below freezing. BAMBONDS, bambonds.com. From the Interactive Broker Studios, our Bloomberg Business Flash, Lisa Mateo.
You got it. We've got futures, well, a little bit mixed right here this morning, and this is out of more economic data. Today we have a read on trade balance, 8:30 Wall Street time, followed by JOLTS job openings and ISM services index. That's at 10 a.m. Tomorrow, initial jobless claims for last week ahead of the jobs report on Friday. So let's start with NASDAQ futures. They're a little change, down about 20 points. Dow futures up about 26, and we have S&P futures up about 1. We have the 2-year yield at 4.27%. That's little changed. The yield on the 10-year, 4.64%, and that is little changed as well. We have the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index down about 0.1%, and Bitcoin down nearly 1%, but still over 100,000. Shares of NVIDIA, let's talk about it, up nearly 2%. Its CEO announced a range of new chips, software, services. This was all at the CES show in Las Vegas to help protect its AI lead. And be sure to tune in here at 11:30 Wall Street time. Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow sitting down with Jensen Huang from CES. Shares of Uber, they're up 2%. And this is after it said it was working with NVIDIA on self-driving technology. And then you have to check in with the chip stocks, right? We have Micron up more than 3% and Marvell Technology up nearly 1%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Thanks so much, Lisa. Greatly appreciate it. I was wandering through 7th edition, Frank Fabozzi, Handbook of Fixed Income Securities today. Jeff Hughes has read it cover to cover.
Has he? Okay.
1,500 pages of fixed income love from Frank Fabozzi. Joining us now, Jeffrey Hughes of BNY. Jeff, let me ask you the question Torsten Slok over at Apollo was talking about. The oddity here of equities higher, sort of a feel-good economy, but yields are higher as well. Why?
U.S. exceptionalism. I think that's still the order of the day, and people are sticking with it. And the way to reconcile that is this is a unique growth paradigm that only the U.S. is capable of right now. You have steady inflation, perhaps upside inflation risk, which the central banks are acknowledging right now. Equities, due to innovation, due to productivity, still potentially generating the earnings growth that is not seen elsewhere. So if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And flows are still heading in that direction. But how much more do you want to add compared to your current portfolio? That's the challenge.
When you sum the correlated Jeffrey Hughes world, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, does that describe Q1 2025?
I think for now that is the base case, but of course it's the trade view when the new administration comes in, which probably has a less of an impact on the US again. So that doesn't exactly disrupt US exceptionalism because the US is a domestically driven economy. How does that translate into the rest of the world, and will that feed back into the US? Will there be some kind of a feedback loop that we're not wary enough of right now, especially with China and potentially Europe as well? I think that's where potential banana skins may lie.
Jeffrey, what do you think this United States Federal Reserve Bank should do in terms of interest rates in the upcoming meetings here?
So it's still data dependent. We're pretty comfortable in terms of looking at market pricing right now, pricing out cuts if inflation surprises to the upside. Is there a case for no cuts at all? If data justifies it, then absolutely. But that's on an absolute basis. On a relative basis, however, and this is where the transmission comes in, how is that going to impact the rest of the world? Will the rest of the world need to stop their rate cuts or end their rate cuts to slow their rate cuts to keep up? We're seeing that in Latin already. But on the other hand, for Asian exporters, how do you reconcile that against tariffs? You've got the Koreans saying, no, we will cut rates. We have cut rates in anticipation of tariffs, even if that results in a weaker currency and inflation risk as well. Some ECB members have also mentioned that. So that's where we need to reconcile US policy against global monetary policy.
So as you mentioned, Jeffrey, we are going to get a new United States administration here in a couple of weeks. The European clients that you talk to, how are they positioning for a second Trump administration? Is it a wait and see? Is it let's be proactive as it might be as it relates to tariffs? How are they reacting?
So I think they are reacting insofar as stay long the US, and they are overweight equities in the US in particular. There's no particular pushback against those views. The underweighting in emerging markets in China has been in place for some time now. I think one area where there is potential for some upside in terms of surprises is actually in Europe itself. European clients are probably going to be the most bearish about Europe, right? Yeah. But at the same time, if I look at where the margins are, is there potential for some convergence? Not full convergence, but some upside lift. Positioning is light, and crucially, euro going through parity, you get the earnings translation lift as well.
Yeah.
So that's where I'd look for some upside risk.
Shout out to Jeffrey Yu, who called euro parity down to 103, I believe, months ago. We welcome all of you across the frigid America this morning. Not going to waste time on the temperature update. Nathan Hager barely got to work for Bloomberg Daybreak. Moscow was like, I can do this. Nathan's it's too cold out. We say good morning on Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, and Sirius XM. Good morning, 99.1 FM Washington up to Boston. Looked at the temperature in Mount Washington. I'm not going to say it on radio.
Really?
Wow. Big negative.
Hardy people up
from
there.
That statistic. Good morning, 92.9 FM. And on YouTube, subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast. That's the way Jeffrey Yu listens to us. Going well. On YouTube, we say good morning. I'll get that on a live chat here on YouTube in a moment. Paul?
Jeffrey, give us a sense of, we're thinking about European markets here. I mean, there's some political instability in Germany, in France. There's economic weakness, probably more than we in America maybe appreciate. How are your investors that you talk to at BNY, how are they approaching just investment opportunities in Europe?
So firstly, in Europe, in terms of the political risk, again, I think all of that is in the price, or much of that is in the price. France is stable for now. In terms of Europe, we know the playbook where things are headed. Of course, we could have last-minute surprises in terms of how the election goes within Germany, but we have a good idea of where the composition of government lie. Now, the key thing for Europe, in two words, public investment. There is funding on the table. Read the Draghi report, right? Even if we can take like a quarter of that, a tenth of that, I think then that will deliver the goods relative to baseline expectations for Europe. So I think that part is underappreciated. So to answer your question, it's more about what people are not focused enough on. So you risk missing other boats here by just being overweight the US. There's nothing wrong with that, but there are other opportunities, underpriced opportunities. I look at our euro hedging. Right, it's at a 20-year low. So back then, so Tom would know this. Of course, last time we went through parity, we were on the 80 handle. Then guess what? Euro dollar double. Right, went to 160 because Germany under Hartz, under Schröder went through reform. Last time, those sick man of Europe headlines within certain Anglosphere publications, those were we are seeing them again. But guess what? A few years after that, Germany was the leading light. The eurozone was back on its feet. So let's bear history in mind.
Jeff, Jeff, a question that we asked Damien Cesar yesterday of Bloomberg Intelligence is within the dynamics of EM currency watching and developed currency watching, the idea of 98 or 92 or even back farther where something breaks. When I look at renminbi, when I look at real, are there things where you're saying this could break?
No. 98 is not going to happen. Let's look at the Indonesian rupiah, right? So at the forefront of what happened in 98, right now they are self-financed, right? So they got enough in terms of sufficient savings. It was a very popular trade for the last 2 or 3 years. They're back to being a commodity currency, selling nickel. They have more than a fifth of the world's nickel, for example. In terms of the renminbi, there is active management right now. More important in terms of quote unquote break, I need to see an upside break in yields in China. The 2-year Chinese government bond could converge with a 2-year Japanese government bond soon, right? So let's just think about that, what that signifies in terms of the economic outlook for China. Japan's 65 basis points right now, Chinese 2-year going through 1%. So I think all of that points to a need for a push for reflation in China, and that's where 150 in the 10-year China, that could go up by 100 basis points easily.
I never editorialize. Lisa Mateo knows that. What Jeff, you just said there, folks, is the single dominant question for global Wall Street right now. I don't care if you're Peter Orszag at Lazard or Solomon over at Goldman Sachs or the leadership of BNY. Jeff, let's study this. Let's go into this deeper. What it is not the yield story. It's price up. There is a frenzy of money moving into Chinese paper. Let's start with the why. Why, Jeff,
The why is 2 reasons. A, equity returns remain substandard and people are looking for an alternative capturing the yield. This is institutional money and some retail money in China right now going into bonds. So over the last quarter or so, that has been significant. But it also, if you look at the 10-year CGB, for example, that has many signals regarding to what trend growth in China is going to be like, what inflation expectations is. So basically, there is no alternative but CGBs from China's perspective. And that's the narrative that Beijing is trying to change and Beijing needs to change.
That's my next question is, what would you guess they will do? I mean, we had Elizabeth Economy on to end the year, who's definitive on the relations, the politics. Forget about that. They're looking at the reality behind those red doors in Beijing. What's the to-do for Beijing to get people out of bonds into a more normative economy?
So spending, that is essential. Get the household to spend. So we talk about fiscal stimulus, fine. Let's say they raise the deficit target normally from around 3% to say 4.5%. That's great. But beyond that headline number, we need to look at where the money is channeled into. Look at the statements today. Improving pension funds, for example, elderly care and the burden on households, often a sore point for China. So they're reforming that. So fiscal directed to improving household cash flow. That is essential. Make people
I don't mean to interrupt, Jeff, but this is too important. Is the issue here, it's a totalitarian regime, and they don't have a bankruptcy process, either business or personal, to clear the trauma.
So to back that up, in terms of looking at the debt load, especially, and I guess you're referring to the real estate market, of course, they are working on that, right? So I think it's been a 20-year process, since they first moved them to reorganize the NPLs in terms of the banks, but it's the off-balance sheet stuff that they are looking at right now. But last year they announced a headline plan to use to help refinance. And again, it's about reducing your interest costs and servicing that debt, and also, just try to maybe offload that from the various books. But going back to the household, to rebalance the economy, you need to quote Professor Pettis, right? You need to generate household demand. And so going back to the fiscal side, you need to kickstart the process where it's positively self-reinforcing. People are seeing their incomes rise again, and they're confident that wages will start growing again. It's not one-off bonuses or things like that, which have been reported for servants. It really is expectations of wage growth, which you are seeing in the US. That will kickstart a process which will be much more beneficial for the economy. And that speaks to the efficiency of fiscal stimulus. It's less now about the headline numbers. It's about the multiplier effect. How do you crowd in spending? How do you crowd in private investment? That will get the 10-year yield back up because people will be happy to move into equities and out of bonds.
Jeff, do you and do markets believe that can happen, that the Chinese government can be successfully doing that?
I think it's a wait and see process, right now, because there are two elements here. One, on a proactive basis, that has been happening since September. The view is, especially onshore and perhaps offshore, what is being done is not enough, and I think there is acknowledgement there. And secondly, you do have tariffs looming in the background. Maybe some clarity is needed to see how the relationship will evolve. But in terms of risk factors onshore, I don't think tariffs is actually too high up the agenda right now. So that's one thing I'm less concerned about for the time being.
Jeff, one final question. I think it's important. You're so wired into global Wall Street, particularly with your London work in LSE. And where do you stand on Sweeney brings this up all the time. Private equity, private credit, it's a boom. Apollo was talking yesterday. They want to put private equity into Lisa Mateo's IRA.
Nice.
Something like that.
Perfect.
Come on, Jeff. You and I have been studying this since time began. Give me your take. I don't want you to get in trouble with the general counsel of BNY, but come on, help me here.
So it's about your contribution to your risk-adjusted returns, right? So if on a risk-adjusted basis, you can make a case for alternatives and also subject to your duration for your IRAs and for your ISAs here with long enough a time horizon, the old endowment profiles with my old wealth management hat on, that is sufficient. You need sufficient allocations into alternatives, and of which private markets is a key part of that right now. So there will be regulatory adjustments, and I think the rest of the world, in the UK, Europe, they're looking to the US to see how this goes from here. So this is here to stay, but subject to contribution of risk. And it's not going to be steady. So tracking errors and also Sharpe ratios, they go up and down. So subject to what people need at this point, their liquidity lockups, the maturities of their profiles, there will always be a role for alternatives. And now the total definition of alternatives has changed. So I see the US leading the way in this for many, many years to come.
And now finally, 15 seconds. Jeff, the surveillance question of the day. Have you been to Greenland?
No, I have not. So might be on my bucket list soon.
Okay, Jeff, for you, thank you so much. With BNY, there was a clinic there on some of the Chinese dynamics. Now, again, we turn to Damien Sassar for great work on that. And Jeff, you just outstanding. I was taking notes there.
Oh, Jeffrey Hughes is a master.
It's that LSE education. I mean, that's all there is to it. Futures up 5, little red and green on the screen, a VIX 16.20. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. President Joe Biden attended a prayer service in New Orleans to offer condolences and pledge federal support to the families of the victims of the New Year's Day attack. Biden was accompanied by the First Lady and other officials.
My wife Jill and I are here to stand with you, to grieve with you, to pray with you, to let you know you are not alone. The rest of the nation is looking at you as well.
Biden promised to make every resource available to complete the investigation and provide additional security for upcoming events in the city. The attack along Bourbon Street, which killed 14 people and injured over 30, is believed to have been carried out by a lone individual inspired by ISIS, who was killed in a shootout with police. A strong earthquake has shaken a mountainous region in western China near Nepal. At least 95 people are dead and 130 others are injured in the magnitude 6.8 quake. It was 10 years ago, gunmen stormed the offices of the satirical newspaper Charlie Hebdo in a deadly assault that shook France and ignited a global outcry in defense of freedom of speech. The nation paused today for a ceremony to honor the victims and renew its resolve to fight for liberty and democracy. The attack on Charlie Hebdo was carried out in retaliation for the newspaper's caricatures of the Prophet Muhammad. President-elect Donald Trump mulls an executive order to protect gas-powered appliances from federal and local regulators seeking to phase them out of homes and businesses. According to Reuters, citing two people familiar with the matter, the order is likely to mirror congressional efforts to limit federal dollars for initiatives that restrict gas-powered appliances or impose regulations which may increase their costs. Global news 24 hours a day, whenever you want it. With Bloomberg News Now, I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Michael, thank you. Paul Sweeney, there are times in your life where you know it's very cool what's happening, even if you're 15 years old. And there I was in the summer of 1968, about 30 feet from Charles de Gaulle on the Champs-Élysées. Someone from that time and place has died. You know Marine Le Pen, she's on the conservative right in France, buttressing up against Mr. Macron and her hated left. Her father, who started all of the far-right modern party in France, has died at 96. Jean-Marie Le Pen has died at 96, that according to Agence France Presse. And it's a generational passing there. He passed on the torch to his daughter.
Yep.
And they did better than good in the recent elections. I mean, he started with fractional results.
Yeah, I mean,
years and years ago.
Again, born June 20th, 1928, passing away. So a wonderful run there on the French far right. And again, it's his daughter following in the footsteps in a very prominent way.
And I didn't get to that with Jeff Yu. There were so many other. The thing on China was brilliant, but. And again, it is the question of far right. We see Mr. Trudeau stepping aside, and you've got a whole Eastern European dynamic, and frankly, almost a global dynamic of some of the themes that Jean-Marie Le Pen touched upon, I guess is how I would put it. We'll have much more on that out of our Paris News Bureau through the day. Right now, red and green on the screen, futures up 5, the VIX 16.19. Paul and I make note of new higher yields. There's no other way to put it. The 30-year bond, 4.86%. The 10-year real yield for global Wall Street, 2.28%. We're on YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts. Thank you for your attention on YouTube.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We've got futures, little change, and this is as traders consider rising trade tensions after Donald Trump denied that report that he might moderate plans for across-the-board tariffs. Now, speaking of trade tension, shares of the world's biggest gaming publisher, Tencent Holdings, fell as much as 8% in Hong Kong, and this is after the Pentagon included it, as well as top EV battery maker CATL. It's in a list that labeled several Chinese firms and military entities. CATL's shares off about 2% in China. And we have the two-year yield, 4.27%, little change. The yield on the 10-year, 4.64%, and that's up 1 basis point. The dollar extending its losses down about 0.1%. That's the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index. The Canadian dollar, have to point that out because it's up just 0.1% after Justin Trudeau announced plans to resign as prime minister. Also want to point out the yen retreated from a 6-month low, and this is after Japan's finance minister warned about excessive FX movements. We have the Japanese yen at 157.76 against the dollar. Finally, some deal-making news. It is official. Getty Images, Shutterstock, they've entered into a definitive merger agreement, and this is going to create a premier visual content company that has shares of Getty Images up about 67% and Shutterstock up 38%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now. Wherever you get your podcasts, I'm Lisa Mateo. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Lisa, thanks so much. Paul, I don't remember this common where there's a transaction and both stocks go up.
Yeah.
That's not what was in the textbook.
Yeah, it's interesting here about this, the value of this content here, just the images and video and that type
So
of
they
thing.
just take out, help us, Lisa, they're just taking out competition.
Yeah.
So
But
people are
they're-
feeling they're going to get a revenue lift.
Because they're both going to create this huge, people go to these for images all the time to create all these marketing concepts.
Yeah, I know.
So
There'll be some regulatory oversight on this
I'm
one.
sure.
Yeah, exactly. That's where it's
Yep.
like Hollywood.
Yep.
I mean,
Yep.
even if it's not like it's not like Nippon and U.S. Steel,
Right.
but it's some form of government's got to go. Why are both stocks to the moon?
Yeah, let's take a look at this marketplace. How big is it, and how much of these guys can control, pro forma? So
we're going to talk about that later today. We have a really special guest from London, one of my heroes, John Kay of the University of Oxford. You know him from the FT over decades and decades. Is really thinking about this. It's like one big global roll-up.
Yeah.
I'm waiting for J.P. Morgan to do a transaction with Bank of America.
Yeah,
Why
that
not?
ain't happening.
We'll see. It's not happening. Thank you for that. That's good to know. Patiently waiting here this morning. Excuse me, it's a cold. I got a chill coming in. Sri Kochagavinian is with us with Aberdeen, and we're thrilled that she could join this morning. I got way too much certitude, Sri. Where is your unknown for 2025?
I think it's a very good question. There's a lot of consensus views around US exceptionalism. So there are a few risks that we definitely need to be considering. And I think first and foremost would be some of those inflationary risks, unfortunately. There is a different backdrop now. So if you think about pre-pandemic, the general sort of long-term trends or structural trends were very much in favor for central banks and disinflationary. So these would be things like globalization, demographics, technological change. So that was pre-pandemic. But now those trends, those winds are blowing in a different direction now, and they're a bit more, they provide a more of an inflationary backdrop. They're very long run. It doesn't mean that inflation's suddenly going to surge, but they will interact with some of these cyclical changes and some of these policy shifts. So it's a different backdrop now.
Sri, I know you tune into every moment of Bloomberg surveillance over in the United Kingdom, but our theme today is why are yields going up? I mean, Torsten Slok writing at Apollo says he really doesn't know why. Let's get an answer. Why are yields going up, Sri?
I think it's a very interesting trend, what's happening now with rates. We have been flagging the volatility in inflation and volatility in rates is going to be a problem for 2025. So let's have a look at the narrative. The narrative is shifting. I think the narrative is primarily with regards to the Fed. We've had a lot of Fed speakers over the weekend, overnight as well, and they have really been in line with this more hawkish tone that we saw coming out of the Fed, particularly in the December meeting. The dot plot changed, and there is now just two cuts priced in for this year, for 2025. And that dot plot shift was quite significant. And we've seen a lot of the Fed pricing really shifting in the futures market. So I think primarily it's a case of, what is this more inflationary backdrop? And I think the markets are paying attention to this. And I think what will be interesting is the shift in yields in response to Trump messaging or the federal speakers. I think there's going to be a greater sensitivity from here. And I think not just in rates, but also in FX markets, we see that positioning is quite stretched there as well. So I think a bit more volatility is really to be expected this year. And that goes back to this idea of inflation as a risk.
So, Sri, if it is in fact higher for longer in terms of rates, and again, as Thomas pointed out, we're, seeing rates higher here despite the Fed cutting rates, where does an investor go? I mean, is it where do they find some safety perhaps?
I think in terms of safety, traditional safe asset would have been sovereign debt, right, and US treasuries. And I think they are likely to be volatile, but within a range. And I think it does seem that perhaps yields could go a little bit higher from here, but we're more likely to be at the higher end for this year. So you could see in the near term, yields pulling back a bit. And it depends on the narrative there. I think in terms of equities, there's still a lot of potential there. US equities are still, a favored risk asset in our view. There are some opportunities in other markets, but the US does seem to be, in terms of the macro backdrop, the growth backdrop is still quite resilient and quite strong. And that's, so the fact that the Fed rates are on hold for longer is partly due to that growth resilience as well.
So at Aberdeen, is Europe a value trap, or is there some intelligent value there to buy with a 36-month time frame?
I think over the longer time, but valuations are in favor of Europe. But there are some challenges. You have to be very careful in terms of stock picking. And obviously, I can't talk about individual names, but I think the overall picture in Europe really is for the ECB, there is more room for the ECB to ease. So that's one factor to consider. So, those rate sensitive sectors, perhaps you can look at those. So the ECB, we are expecting another 4 rate cuts this year. They have a different growth outlook. Growth is, a bit more anemic in the euro area. Disinflation trend is it's a bit more on track than in other areas, compared to the US. So there's more scope for easing there. There are, however, some political problems, and there is a divergence in terms within Europe as well. So if you're looking at Germany and France, there are political issues there. Germany faces structural headwinds, and some of the bigger lights really are in the southern European areas. So you have to be very careful in picking, but there is value there.
So you're saying go to America, foreign flows into America. Does Aberdeen just say then resilient or even ever stronger dollar?
I think it's very difficult to say how much further the dollar can go from here. Dollar strength is likely to be a story, but as I mentioned, positioning looks a bit stretched, particularly if you look against the euro area. You can see that the macro makes sense to be, long dollar versus the euro. However, I think the positions are very, very stretched at the moment, and you need to be quite careful when you enter this trade. Yeah, and then also, there's been interest in the yen. We were talking about the yen earlier. I overheard some stories there for the yen. The yen versus the dollar would be very tricky, but yen versus the euro, depending on the timing, depending on positioning, longer term over the next year or so, there could be some opportunities there. Okay. So I think, looking a bit more broadly and timing would be quite key.
Okay, Sri, thank you so much. Sri Kochikovidian with Aberdeen with us this morning. That's the interns, we got a new set of interns in, and, to book Jeff, you and Sri back to back is like what it's about. Lisa, we now turn to our Icelandic correspondent, Paul Sweeney. He's been within 889 miles of Nuuk, Greenland. Pray tell, what was Iceland like?
Look at it here. 836,000 miles, or square miles. Danish kroner is the currency. Population, let's round up 57,000 people.
Yeah, you round it up.
So I'm going to round up. But apparently, and it's a Danish territory, so maybe there's a real estate deal to be done there.
And of course, the news, Donald Trump Jr. is going as a private citizen today. He's taking, I think they call it Trump Force One, the plane.
Okay.
Nuuk is on the left coast. Ready for this? On the west coast of Greenland, like you wave at Labrador, Canada. Yep. Good morning, Mr. Trudeau. On the left coast of Greenland, you're closer to New York than Copenhagen. I'm learning every day.
Okay.
Facts you can know.
It's big too. It's a big island.
The economic tone is Denmark hasn't developed it, and it's like fishing in that. Paul, you got to go. Can you work an assignment?
I might have to work something out there. I've been to Iceland, so pretty close there. I have never been to Greenland, it's just if you look at it on a map, it's just white. So I'm just guessing it's a big piece of ice.
Okay, so this is the southern western tip is Nuuk, Greenland.
Nice.
Mr. I think McKee may be attending.
Okay.
He may be our correspondent there.
Very
Michael
good.
McKee, Greenland correspondent. I can see it now. Green on the screen, futures up 8, the VIX 16.13. What do you need to know? Look at your 30-year mortgage. Seems to be edging higher. On YouTube and worldwide, in Greenland, Bloomberg surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Matei. We've got little movement in futures. This is as traders look to Friday's jobs report, which is expected to show employers kind of tempered hiring. Economists say the data unlikely to change the view of Fed officials that they can slow the pace of rate cuts. Now, yesterday, you had Fed Governor Lisa Cook, who said that policymakers can proceed more cautiously. This is during a sturdy labor market and also lingering inflation pressures. So right now, we have the two-year yield, 4.27%. Little change. The yield on the 10-year, 4.64%. And that's up 1 basis point. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index, that's down about 0.1%. Few companies making news. Apple, it plans to expand its news app. Sources telling the Financial Times that it's considering adding new countries to that platform. And Meta, it's named 3 new directors to its board. That includes UFC chief Dana White. And finally, the world's biggest hedge fund, Bridgewater Associates, reportedly cut 7% of its staff. Sources say it's going to help the company remain lean and also have that flexibility to hire that top talent. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
I read the statement. What a PR statement from them. What's the real story? Anybody know?
Dana White?
No, Bridgewater.
Oh, Bridgewater.
You know, what's the,
Are they sometimes? I think some of these firms are getting too big. They have too much money. They can't allocate and get the returns they need.
Just pull it back, and we may lose Greifeld to him. We'll have to see.
Exactly.
Joining us now, Catherine Greifeld, of course, open interest at 9. If she usually gets in like 8:42.
Yeah. No
Came
rush.
in today. Paul wants to get to BitDog. I don't. Okay, it's cold out there.
It certainly is.
Does Gus have a special blanket? I mean, if the horse is in the barn, are you rocking the doo-doo winter blanket from Hermes this morning, $2,050?
You know, I'm so glad you asked. So Gus actually lives outside. Gus is a horse, and I own him. He lives outside. He has a run-in shed.
This is in Brooklyn?
This is not in Brooklyn. This is in the great state of New Jersey. I just bought him a new blanket. 200 grams is the inner lining, because it's cold out there. But if you have a heavy enough blanket and you have a heavy enough horse, and he's a big boy.
He's a big boy.
He's a big boy.
Yeah.
He's doing okay.
So he hangs out, like, seriously, like out west.
Yeah.
There's these horrific winter long things. It's not funny.
No.
And they have to be watched and all, but when does it get too cold,
When does it get too cold? I mean, it depends on the type of horse. So Gus is half a draft horse. He's a Shire cross. He's going to do fine. December is better for him than August or July.
Okay, interesting.
So the types of horses that live out west, if they're, I would assume that their owners are taking care of them. If they live outside, though, they're probably bundled up. They also grow winter coats.
Somebody on YouTube emailed in and said, forget about Bitcoin, talk Gus. So we're talking.
I was thinking about Bitcoin this morning because I came in early for this hit, and I was trying to think of a way to make you care a little bit about Bitcoin. I think I have a narrative here. MicroStrategy. Have you guys been following MicroStrategy? Michael Saylor.
Yep.
Nominally a software company.
Nominally, right.
Nominally.
Kind of a hedge fund for crypto.
Exactly. It's like a holding company this point.
Exactly.
Added to the NASDAQ 100. I don't know what your personal investment accounts look like. I assume you have some NASDAQ 100.
Lots of risk.
Lots of risk. There's some chatter that they could be added to the S&P 500 later this year. And if so, indirectly, I mean, your retirement accounts are going to have some Bitcoin exposure here.
Exactly.
I should send her a dozen tulips every Monday, just to prop on her desk so she can look at tulips until they break.
Until they wilt.
Pick it up until they wilt.
All right, so we're a month and a half from the election, past the election. What does the crypto community really think is going to happen with this new administration coming in?
They're still psyched,
okay.
I would say. I mean, you can see that in the price action. You can see that in $100,000. There is some fear, I would say, creeping into the market, and you've seen it in the stock market as well. Some of that post-election enthusiasm fading or wavering. It depends now what policies we get. It depends on what Donald Trump actually does. There's some hope out there that there's going to be a Bitcoin strategic reserve, something along those lines. He's put in a lot of crypto-friendly people in his inner circle. There's a lot of pro-crypto candidates who have made it through to Congress. We'll see if that actually results in something as tangible as a Bitcoin strategic reserve or something along those lines. But now is the show me moment.
And presumably Gary Gensler out at the SEC. Do we know who's going to go in and whether that person, how they view crypto?
Well, Paul Atkins, we know, is coming in. I am very excited for David Gura's interview with Gary Gensler. I think that should be illuminating.
Okay.
Right. Paul Atkins, though, I mean, even beyond crypto, there's a lot of optimism about him. I was speaking to some ETF folks on ETF IQ on Bloomberg Television yesterday.
A nice plug.
Thank you. Mondays at noon. And there's a lot of optimism that maybe a Paul Atkins would be more open to a private asset ETF, something along those lines. Some of the funky things that people want to put into the intraday traded ETF wrapper. We'll have to see. Remember, there was a lot of optimism around Gary Gensler when he came in.
Yes, that's true.
Oh, but come on, Gensler and David Gura with Gary Gensler tomorrow in the 11 o'clock hour. Katie Greifeld, is it simple to say all of this Bitcoin surge is because Gensler opened individual investment, easy individual investment to Bitcoin?
I would say this is more about Donald Trump and the optimism there. I mean,
the move to 100,000
yes.
is because of the president-elect.
I would rest my case on that. I mean, you think about Donald Trump. He went to some of the flagship Bitcoin events. He went to a Bitcoin conference in Miami.
Yeah, you were at it. Come on.
I was not quite there, but maybe it wasn't a far trip for him from Mar-a-Lago, but still the move to 100,000, I would say that was Donald Trump. Whether the move to 80,000 or 90,000 was Donald Trump, but what finally got us over the line.
A Bitcoin strategic reserve.
Yes.
They're going to put the Bitcoin in the salt mines down in Louisiana?
Fort Knox. I don't know where they're going to put
it. A Bitcoin strategic reserve.
There is some skepticism about that, even within the crypto community. We interviewed Michael Novogratz on Open Interest a couple months ago at this point, and he doesn't see it. He doesn't see the case for it or necessarily see it happening.
Are these guys cashing out?
Michael Novogratz isn't. I think he still has he got a tattoo of Terra Luna before that whole thing exploded. He's still all in. And he's the real deal. He has serious Wall Street credentials, and he's the head of Galaxy, which is one of the more interesting and more serious investment asset managers in the space.
I can't focus. Can you take us to Michael Barr, Paul?
Absolutely.
Can I promo my show a little bit?
Please.
Okay.
Please.
10 a.m. Open Interest. If you're not listening and watching Bloomberg Surveillance, we do have an interview with Jan Hatzius over at Goldman.
Yeah. His jobs day call for Friday is a little tepid.
Yeah.
A
little light. And I mean, he did nail the December Fed meeting. He said that they're going to signal a slower pace of rate cuts in 2025. Right. He's expecting a skip this month from the Fed. So.
Did your entourage expand this year? Did you go from 7 people to 9?
We didn't. We're doing more with less, just like Bridgewater.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Exactly.
Katie Greifeld, thank you so much.
Thank
Good report there, and Gus the Horse, and also on Bitcoin. Look for an important interview. Gura and Gensler. Look for that tomorrow. Right now, with our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. Today is catch-up day for U.S. airlines as this week's winter weather has led to thousands of flight cancellations and delays. Kathleen Bangs is with the flight tracking company FlightAware.
What we saw were over 4,000 flights canceled Sunday and Monday, and delayed flights almost up to 20,000. That sounds like a lot. We've had winter storms, however, where they were far worse, but this is definitely the most impactful that we've seen so far this winter season.
FlightAware's Kathleen Bangs says today winds are going to be gusting potentially up to 45 or 50 miles an hour, slowing down ground operations. Meanwhile, bitter cold will hit the southern U.S. today. President Biden visited New Orleans to show support following last week's terror attack. 14 people were killed and dozens injured by a man who plowed a pickup truck into crowds on Bourbon Street during New Year's Eve celebrations after pledging his allegiance to ISIS. During an interfaith service in the French Quarter, the president said that he was there to grieve with the city and offer words of encouragement.
New Orleans defines strength and resilience. You define it, whether it's in the form of this attack, or hurricanes or superstorms. This city and its people get back up. That's the spirit of America as well.
Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Michael Barr, thank you. I got an email, and they said, how does Lisa do the newspapers? How do you pick from 11, 12, 13 news organizations, including Bloomberg? When do you start this? Like 3 a.m.?
I started at 3:15 when I get in the car in the morning.
You're in the car and you're going through trying to
here.
pick out
Not
stocks.
driving. I'm not driving and doing this. Yes, no. And I just started going through whatever like stands out in my
Are there
head.
too many to pick?
Sometimes, yes.
It's like you don't know what to do.
Yes, and then Bob has to try and figure it out. Good luck.
Bob's our intern.
Okay.
Yeah, futures up 10, the VIX 16.11. Next, the newspapers. From New York City, Bloomberg's surveillance.
Now a look at the front pages. What's making news around the world? Your daily roundup of today's headlines from major publications.
Take a look at the front pages of Lisa Mateo Hour. It's brought to you by IBKR. Financial advisors switch to Interactive Brokers for lowest cost global trading and turnkey custody solutions. No ticket charges, no conflicts of your interests at ibkr.com/RIA. Lisa, what do you have?
Okay, so we are in day 3 of New York City's congestion pricing.
Yeah, how's that going?
Okay, so this is how it's going. The New York Post is saying drivers are coming up with, creative ways to kind of beat the system. They're basically hiding their license plates. So the New York Post, they spotted a few of these. They're covering like a single digit on the license plate to make it look like another one. They scratch it out. They paint over it. They put tape over it. They use this translucent glue to make it harder to read. They're doing all these different things, attaching those like fake dealer plates that can be taken off and put back on. And then you have the ones with the plate flippers that has the button inside the car that you press and it flips the plate. So it gives a different number. But they're doing all these different things. We are not promoting this. I just want to say that because there could be a $500 fine, if you get caught doing this. But it just goes to show you how it's affecting, so many different people. They go into these extents.
Got a huge response. General Lieber with us yesterday from the MTA. It was a class act. He answered some tough questions.
Yep, he was there. And so we'll see how this plays out. But it seems to kind of be working so far. I haven't seen any major problems, but
next,
so far, we shall see. Day 3 going into day 4 tomorrow. Okay, so this new study, you know that what they call the sandwich generation, those who are caring for the young kids as well as the older aging parents at the same time.
Yep.
So this study says that it's starting to affect their mental, physical health. It's a UK study because it's from the Financial Times, but it really shows similar things that are happening here in the US. Typically, those between the ages of 30 and 49. So for some of those listeners who are experiencing this. So it just shows that their mental health is kind of deteriorating faster than others who don't have to kind of juggle both of these different sides of the fact with childcare and aging parent care. And those who did it like 20 or more hours a week. But it just shows that more help is needed for some of these folks. Workplace flexibility also.
And some of it's having
it's a big
kids
debate.
Later. That's
the reason why. They're having kids later. So now they're at this age where their parents are aging, but yet they have kids who are like 2, 3, 4, 5 years old at the same time.
And the parents are living longer. So
yes, and the parents living longer.
Yep.
So
what else do you have?
Becoming a big, big thing. You talked about Greenland, right? So we got to go there. Donald Trump Jr. said to go over there. He made the announcement during his show last night on the Rumble platform. So he said it's a very long personal day trip. He said he's not meeting with anyone in particular. Sources are telling the Washington Post, they had this story that he's going to just shoot some video for his podcast. But the foreign minister did say it's an open country. They welcome all visitors. But you know the tension, right? You had Donald Trump who said, Greenland, the ownership and control of Greenland is a necessity. Then you had the prime minister firing back and saying that it's not for sale. It never will be for sale. So a lot of tension there, but he's apparently going to be there today.
The prime minister says the island is not for
Yes.
sale
Okay.
and will never be for sale.
Not at all.
So there you go.
Yeah, well, he can show up, and he can have the I can't grill it. Olange gevedde brood.
Oh boy.
Mager skinke Dijon. Vester havos de crème. That's the croque madame. 95 whatever. 95 euros? No.
Krona. It's Krona.
It's Krona?
Some kind of Danish
Thank
Krona.
you. You're nailing it, Paul.
Oh my
Krona.
gosh.
That's the Morgenmad, which I think is breakfast at the Esmeralda Cafe.
Oh, there you go.
What is
Nook,
that?
Greenland. It's Paul's going. He's our
Yeah, exactly.
Icelandic
It's a
correspondent.
day trip.
What do you drink with that?
Well, let me look down here
Maybe some Danish beer or
at the
something.
bottom.
Gosh.
At the bottom, there's a long menu at the Esmeralda.
Oh, my
They have the Bugu,
Okay.
the Greenland Slemmenbuff Fra Narsak. I have no idea what that is. Lisa Mateo, thank you so much
You got
for the newspapers today. Greatly appreciate it, particularly in Greenland. I'm learning. It's
I know.
informative.
I know. It's close by.
Look.
I didn't know it was so close.
Ed Ludlow, 11 o'clock. He shut down the bar at the Venetian Hotel last night. He's
Solid
doing his
bar
Katy Perry imitation. Las Vegas, Ed Ludlow, Jensen Weighing at 11:30.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
What do you say to people scared stiff in cash?
We've got an administration, presumably, that will be pro-business, lower taxes.
With Lisa Mateo on markets
AI affecting demand for cloud computing.
and Michael Barr with news.
U.S. Secretary of State discussed the conflict in Gaza.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Paul Sweeney, Tom Keene, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo. Good morning, Greenland as well. Nick Greenland, I don't know. They're listening to us, I guess, on the internet.
Yeah, we'll do
Bloomberg
this.
Podcast.
Yeah,
That's how you do it. Just subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast. Out on YouTube, humbled by the international reach of YouTube, working for us each and every day. Got two very, very astute equity people coming up in the next 20 minutes. Timothy Craighead will join us, director of all of equity at Bloomberg Intelligence, world class. And Matthew Hornbach, watched mightily at Morgan Stanley, will lead us off here in a matter of minutes. Out on YouTube and across the frigid America, on your commute, Bloomberg Surveillance, we're brought to you by CohnReznick Advisory Assurance Tax. Discover game-changing strategies to maximize value, optimize performance, and manage risk. Put your business at the forefront. Thank you, CohnReznick. Way back, I said, well, I got 42 listeners.
Sure.
And CohnReznick said, let's do it.
Perfect.
They said, let's do it. And
Let's
they've
do
just
it.
built and built with this. Thank you, CohnReznick, for your support here in 2025 of all we do at Bloomberg Surveillance. Futures up 8 right now. Let us go to Lisa Mateo with a Bloomberg Business Flash from the Interactive Broker Studios.
Yeah, futures pretty much treading water this morning. This is ahead of more economic data. In about a half hour from now, we get a read on trade balance. That's followed by JOLTS job openings and ISM service index at 10 a.m. Wall Street time. Tomorrow, initial jobless claims for last week. That comes ahead of the big jobs report on Friday. So NASDAQ futures up about 2 points. Dow futures up 76. S&P futures up 7. The 2-year yield at 4.28%. That's little changed. And the yield on the 10-year 4.63%. And that is little changed. The Bloomberg dollar spot index is little change, and Bitcoin right now it's down about 0.8% at just over 100,000. Shares of Nvidia, well, they're up more than 2% after its CEO announced a new lineup including gaming chips, a $3,000 desktop computer. It also though announced its partnership with Uber, and that has shares of Uber up more than 2%. Be sure, tune in at 11:30 Wall Street time. Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow sits down with Jensen Huang. He's going to be live from CES in Las Vegas. Before we go, a few chip stocks to check in with. Micron up more than 4%. We have Marvell Technology up about 0.1%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Thanks so much. Back-to-back tweets, sometimes in the feed. It's interesting. And there was this morning in my feed, Dan Ives commenting on the worship at the Jensen Huang event, the speech yesterday. And there was Ed Ludlow showing that for the Horde, it's about the price. There's the present gizmo, which is, I'm making this up, folks, a couple $1,000s. And the next gizmo is $549. And that got according to Ludlow, that got the biggest response. Was the price reality and battle of that. So we'll have Jensen Huang with us with Ed Ludlow in the 11 o'clock hour. He writes an exceptionally intelligent note at Morgan Stanley. Matthew Hornbach joins us right now. Matt, I got a problem. Everybody from Stolfus over to Opco down to the gloom at the lower end is optimistic this year. Is your Matt Hornbach radar up?
Hey, Tom, thanks for having me on the show. My radar is always up. It's just a matter of whether it's the end of the year or whether it's the beginning of the year. But the radar is up. And I do think that there are going to be some interesting opportunities in 2025.
All right, let's go there. Matt, global head of macro strategy. That means you can go anywhere, anytime, and look at any asset. What's your 2025 lead right here?
Well, I think one of the expectations investors are bringing into this year is that it's all good and there's nothing bad, and that may be the case by the time we get to the end of 2025. Nothing bad may have happened, but when we talk about things like a recession, obviously nobody talks about recession anymore because it hasn't happened. But I'm actually less focused on the probability of a recession. What I am worried about is that we may have more recession scares. If you think about the past 18 months, we've had one recession scare every 6 months. Every 6 months, the bond market prices in a very aggressive reduction in the Fed's policy rate. Now, that aggressive reduction doesn't come to pass. The economy ends up hanging in there just fine. But for markets, which is what I focus on, we have to be worried about being worried and think about where we end up at the end of that.
Okay, we got a frame out here, Paul. Hornbach was running, he was with Robbie Feldman running Japan years ago at Morgan Stanley. He was doing Japan, doing the yen, doing trading, probably fluent in Japan. And at the same time, he's a CMT. He's like a market technician.
Oh, boy.
Matt, we're going wonk right now. I got to impress Tim Craighead. He just walked in the studio here. On a semi-log NDX, I have support on my Kleinman exponential moving averages. Are you ready? A 35% drop from here. How extended is the NDX?
Oh, I think it seems pretty extended for sure. One of the things that's also very extended related to Japan is dollar yen. Dollar yen in the high 150s is it's understandable why it's there. The rate differentials are still wide. People expect the U.S. to remain exceptional. But I was just in Japan over the holidays, and it is exceptionally affordable, given where the currency is. It just doesn't make much fundamental sense for the currency to be so weak. And so I would say one thing that I would be looking for quite a decline in 2025 is the dollar yen exchange rate. I think that can very easily go below 140 by the time we get to the end of 2025.
That's a big figure move.
That is a big figure move. And we haven't seen that. They got the yen at 157.70. Hey, Matt, the good friends at Morgan Stanley, are you guys seeing fund flows coming into the U.S., say, from European investors?
Greenland?
From Greenland and other parts in Europe?
Well, I would say there's a lot of flows coming into gold land, not necessarily Greenland, but certainly the dollar does benefit when investors are looking to allocate into either a safe asset like gold or U.S. Treasuries. The dollar is going to benefit. So in that sense, Greenland and gold land are highly correlated at this moment. When you see U.S. interest rates going up, you also see the U.S. dollar appreciating. There's more real return offered in the U.S. And even if you don't really care that much about real return, you can just go buy gold.
One final question. I want to swing it to Japan, but I'm going to stay on U.S. dollar, Matt Hornbach. To me, it's a nonlinear move. On DXY at 108, 109, are we getting up to where there's a kink, where there's movement off dollar index, or can it be a smooth ride higher in strong dollar?
Well, no, I think if you look at the dollar over the past couple of years, it has been anything but smooth. The dollar has largely been range bound, and that's in large part because interest rates have been largely range bound since the Fed stopped their hiking cycle back in July of 2023. So it's been a range bound market. It's definitely not been smooth. 25 is not expected to be a smooth year for the dollar, but that's where a surprise could come to the fore. Is the dollar could actually could move lower in a more smooth fashion, because ultimately we think the Fed's going to continue to lower rates. And by more than what you see priced into the market today.
Interesting. Okay. Matt, thank you. Matt Hornbach with a brief here to get us started on 2025. He is with Morgan Stanley. Red and green in the screen, not the enthusiasm up front of the last 2 days, but nevertheless, futures fractionally higher. The VIX 16.15. We're looking at a higher yield regime this morning. That's what Tim Craighead would say. It's a regime. Exactly. We have a yield. The yield space, as they say, 2 years, 4.27. I'm on the 5% watch on the 30-year U.S. full faith and credit. What's that do? Put a mortgage at 8%?
We're over 7% now.
7.2.
So my 6% that I have on the Jersey Shore compound.
It's an outrage.
It's not too bad now. I mean, I was bummed when I did it.
You're going to refi?
I was looking for a 4 handle. That's not happening. That's not happening.
Maybe wait. Oil up. Paul mentioned this 2 days ago. Oil from 71 out to 74 on American West Texas Intermediate. Joining us right now, Tim Craighead, driving all of our equity coverage, particularly with a European angle. He's out of London.
Yes. It's Queen Victoria Street.
Very, very good. He joins us in studio here in New York. Let me just start with an overarching question. Everyone knows Europe's cheap. Is it a value trap?
Really interesting on 2 points with that, Tom.
I did 2 points.
Yes.
Can I go home?
Yeah, you can go home now.
And thanks for having me on. Number one, it can be if there's not an earnings story that goes along with the valuation. As we all know, things can be cheap forever. You need something to catalyze a change. It is interesting over the last couple of few months that one of the best markets in terms of forward estimate revision is surprisingly the UK. Go figure. Whether this lasts or not, I think this coming earnings reporting period, the next one will be quite important. Second point that I'd make is Europe is cheap, but it's not as cheap as maybe you think. The forward multiple on Bloomberg Europe, on MSCI Europe, on the Stock 600 is about 13 times forward earnings. Okay, now that seems...
So it's trading at 1/5 of NVIDIA.
Yeah. So but importantly, if you back the UK out of MSCI Europe, the multiple goes to 15 times.
Oh, interesting.
The UK is 11. The UK is where...
The UK is trading at 11 times earnings?
The UK is cheap. Now, importantly, if you look at Europe ex-UK at 15 times, and you look at developed world ex-US 15 times. Europe's at parity with the rest of the world if you just take out the UK. And the UK is still a big chunk of the European market.
Why is the UK cheaper?
So if you look at the UK, 50% of the UK market is in healthcare, staples, in financials. And all of those groups trade cheap. They trade cheap in the UK to begin with relative to Europe, but even in Europe, those are cheaper groups.
Away from Bloomberg Intelligence, are you seeing long-only buy side in Europe buying American? What is the nuance in January of this year over the appetite to buy marginal Mag 7 in America?
Yeah, I think that probably depends investor by investor. I mean, clearly, if you've got a global mandate and you've been out of the U.S., it's killed you. But relative to what you all are talking about in the previous interview, the valuation has gotten so extended. Gina Martin Adams put out a really interesting chart over the course of the last week or two, and it showed good old-fashioned price to book relative to ROE, classic valuation comparison. And on that, across all markets, the U.S. is so far off the chart from a traditional valuation perspective. That's the hesitation, stating the obvious. I go to a number of events called fund forums where there's investors and there's funds that are presenting. And at all of these, the focus is what else is there out there outside of the U.S. that we can take a look at, because everybody knows they have to have something there, but they're looking for other alternatives.
So you guys at Bloomberg Intelligence put out every year kind of the 50 stocks to watch in the upcoming year. I'm looking at it now. There's some really interesting names. I like how you guys break it down thematically. Like one of them is China stimulus. Because we talk about China a lot, but it's almost in the context of it's uninvestable. Do you guys at Bloomberg Intelligence see some opportunities in China?
Yes, unambiguously. And it is interesting. When you and I had chatted about this list, which we put out every year, last year, we had a pretty long list of China-related names. They're all negative. It was all related to the property crisis. This year, there are 5 names on the list. 4 of them are positive, and it's oriented towards China stimulus actually taking hold and doing something. There's a property company that's actually in Hong Kong that we think will benefit from flows coming out of China. There's a couple that aren't China related, but China specific, but they're China plays. Vale. It's Latin American, but it has a China edge. There's also an aluminum company in China that's on our list. We think it's a positive story, not a negative story.
Paul, I'm glad you brought this up. The China ETF, I've never looked at it, MCHI, from the COVID peak of optimism is down 51%.
Yeah.
That's a bear market.
That's a bear market.
Another one in China to think about is just simply what's going on with the wealth flow. You all may have seen this report that we put out not long ago about the Hong Kong wealth hub. Money, and there's a lot of money in China that was going whole hog into property, is now seeking other avenues, and a lot of it's going through family offices and things along those lines. A lot of those are based in Hong Kong. There's a real money flow story about market-related investments coming out of China through Hong Kong into the globe, and companies like Hong Kong Exchange, companies like CITIC Securities play right into that. HSBC has a huge leverage story on this.
Well, they got Steve Major holding court in Hong Kong. I mean, the guy's God. So are the Chinese then doing family offices over to Japan? What's the relationship there of
that's a good question.
I got 3 good questions today. You can come every day, Tim.
Good question. I don't have a good answer.
Well, welcome to Surveillance. Tim, thank you so much. Tim Craighead in studios with us, usually at Queen Victoria Street. This is brilliant research on the Bloomberg terminal. It's BI. Sweeney's familiar with this. It's unbelievable. Schiffman is he's a machine.
Yep, good stuff. Credit, equities, credit, commodities, everything.
Craighead doesn't read Schiffman, but he's there. And Gina's just killing it.
Yep, absolutely.
Like being the market,
strategy,
support,
policy, everything.
Okay, futures up 10, Dow futures up 98. The VIX better than 24 hours ago, 16.10. With our news in New York City, Michael Bowe.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. This week's winter weather has led to thousands of flight cancellations and delays, with more expected as airlines try to catch up and deal with continued weather issues. Kathleen Bangs is with the flight tracking company FlightAware.
Philadelphia is going to have blowing snow, so that's going to create some low visibility, which means probably some delays. But going into the big triad, New York's LaGuardia, JFK, and Newark, looking like clear skies, but we expect to see a lot of delays because of the winds.
Meanwhile, the next round of bitter cold is set to envelop the southern U.S. after the first significant winter storm of the year blasted a huge swath of the country with ice, snow, and wind. Jimmy Carter's state funeral moves to Washington after observances in his native Georgia. The 39th president's remains will leave the Carter Presidential Center this morning and fly to Washington aboard Special Air Mission 39. During a prayer service in New Orleans for the victims of the New Year's Day attack in the French Quarter, President Biden says he and the First Lady empathize with the families of the people who were killed.
I promise you, the day will come when the memory of your loved one, you pass that park, open that closet door, smell that fragrance, just remember that laugh. When the memory of your loved one will bring a smile to your lips before a tear to your eye.
Biden said the federal government would support the people of the French Quarter as they heal. Jean-Marie Le Pen, the founder of France's far-right National Front, who ran for president 5 times, has died. According to a statement from his family, Le Pen died after having been admitted to a care facility several weeks ago. Jean-Marie Le Pen, father of Marine Le Pen, was 96. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it. With the Bloomberg News Now, I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
And Michael Barr, thanks so much. Out on YouTube, the live chat, one of the reasons to subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast, really intelligent live chat. Ben's killing it. No hangover in sight. What is the pulse on animal spirits? I should ask that question. Paul, this is a huge deal, whether it's Matt Hornbach, Jeff Yu, Sri, at Aberdeen. The bottom line is we misjudged animal spirits last year. They were better than good.
They were better than good. So now we've had 23, 24. Both gave you north of 20% returns on the S&P 500 here. And again, post-election, there's an economic sense of optimism out there. And maybe it's lower taxes. Maybe it's deregulation. We'll see.
So we're pulling back. But are we really back enough to diminish top-line GDP? I'm not there yet.
Yeah, I'm not there yet. So it'll be interesting to see how the Fed kind of reacts over the next couple of meetings here, whether they see a need to continue to cut rates or maybe to pause a little bit.
I mean, we're done 4 or 5 days in a row. Yesterday, we sort of gave it back at the end,
yeah,
right?
That's what happens.
Like we're up big.
Yeah, that's what happens at the end of the day when it's a little bit tired out there. So
you know, one of the interns just said to me, whispered in my ear, "You have Alex Steele in the 9 o'clock joining us."
Really?
Scheduled in the 9 o'clock hour. A Steele.
Wow. That's big.
I think I got to talk hydrocarbons with her.
Oh, she's the one.
You know, talk
She's
oil.
the one.
She's got some inside knowledge there. You got to stay with us, folks. We got a lot going on here. Thank you out on YouTube as well. I really want to shout out Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. When I was in France, like people, that's how they listen. They tune in. It's like there.
Yep.
It's like American technology there. It's Bloomberg's surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And this futures report brought to you by Oracle. Attention growing businesses. Oracle offering to cut your current cloud bill in half if you move to Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. For new U.S. customers with minimum financial commitment. Offer ends March 31st. See if your company qualifies at oracle.com/Bloomberg. All right, we've got futures pretty much treading water this morning. Right now, Dow futures up about 0.2%, 97 points.
Screen.
It is, but you got NASDAQ up 2 points, S&P futures up 10 points. So we're getting there. We have the 2-year yield, 4.28%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year, 4.64%. And that is little change as well. The dollar extending its losses. Right now, the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index down about 0.1%. Have to point out the Canadian dollar. It's up 0.2%. Justin Trudeau announces plans to resign as prime minister. And also, I have to point out the yen, too. It retreated from a 6-month low. The yen is at 157.66 against the dollar. We have the euro, British pound stronger, Bitcoin up just above, lower this morning, but at above 100,000. Shares, the world biggest gaming publisher, Tencent Holdings, fell as much as 8% in Hong Kong. Washington moving to blacklist the Chinese company, as well as a few others, including EV battery maker CATL. Those shares off about 2% in China. And companies making news, Getty Images, yes, agreed to buy rival stock photos provider Shutterstock. A deal would create a big company worth about $3.7 billion, including debt. You have Getty up about 46%, Shutterstock up about 28%. And finally, another Wall Street bank walking away from a major climate finance group, JP Morgan Chase, leaving Net Zero Banking Alliance. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mateo. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Lisa Mateo, thanks so much. Trade balance coming up. Delayed. It's like 2 months, 3 months behind. You know, it's,
Okay.
we'll have it for you. It folds into GDP. And McKee told me that.
Yep.
And we'll have that for you. But we've got a lot of economic data coming up here
10 o'clock.
to the jobs report on
Yep.
Friday. Program note, Jensen and Ed Ludlow and Jensen Wong, shifted back here. It'll be after the Paul Sweeney extravaganza.
Exactly.
Into the afternoon.
Yes.
But we will bring you that important conversation, particularly after the response, the greeting that Mr. Wong got in at CES in Las Vegas. Red and green on the screen. I'm busting Lisa's chops, but she's right. Of course, she's always right. Red and green on the screen this morning. Megan Horniman joins us right now from Verdant's Capital, always with an intelligent note. We're just talking about this, Megan, so let me go there. It's been the great underestimation of consumer resiliency. Does that fold into a decent nominal GDP that can deliver revenue growth and earnings growth for American companies?
Well, it depends on if they can continue to sustain the amount of spending that we had over the past year. I mean, I think it surprised most when you look at credit card debt at a record high, credit card rates at a record high. These things are not typically what you see that coincide with consumers that continue to spend the way that they do. So that's something that we have to see if it continues. If it does continue, which I think is unlikely, then yes, that can translate into that revenue and earnings growth. But I think it's going to be a more challenging environment in the first half of the year for the consumer as they start to pull back a bit. Don't forget also that the unemployment situation is starting to show cracks here. We'll get a lot more information this week, but if you have record high credit card debt along with a weakening labor market, that tends to lead to consumers to pull back on spending.
Megan, some people are now starting to talk a little bit more about inflation being a little bit more sticky right here at these levels and maybe even accelerating a little bit. Is that a concern for you in 2025?
Absolutely. We definitely can see that it's been stalled, the progress that the Fed has made. This was a risk that we talked about back when the Fed took that 50 basis point rate cut. Inflation is rarely an easy spike high and then all the way come back down. It tends to move in waves. And we're concerned that we're in one of those waves where we're getting a bit of an uptick here. Now, one of the most important things that we look at is that prices paid component in the ISM surveys, not just the manufacturing, but the services. And we will get that today as well. So that'll be some more indication because that sticky inflation has been in services and housing.
So, Megan, for 2025, some of the questions that people are asking as it relates to the equity markets are leadership. What's going to lead this market higher in 2025? Is it going to be the Magnificent Seven or just big tech broadly, or can it be something else?
I think the Magnificent Seven specifically are going to have a bit of a difficult year. Now, while there may be earnings growth there, I'm not saying this is a negative earnings growth environment, but the interest rate environment is not going to be as favorable as to really to warrant these elevated PE multiples. Sometimes we don't see a correction that's really led by any specific catalyst, but just a valuation correction. And I think the Magnificent Seven can be due for that in the first half of this year. Going into the second half of this year, these are the things that'll turn into the leadership will be some of that rotation. I think you'll see that rotation take footing, and then I think you'll start to see an appetite for small and mid-cap stocks as we start to move and look at those valuations, as they're just historically cheap compared to the large cap space.
What are your clients saying? What are they doing?
Our clients aren't concerned right now with having excess cash and dry powder in this environment. When you're looking at valuations where they are, and when you're looking at valuations in the equity market compared to even the bond market and compared to even cash, you can earn more in cash than you can in the earnings yield of the S&P 500. So this is an environment where they're okay just holding on to some cash, taking opportunities, being patient. And I think those opportunities will arise in the first half of this year to take more, more risk appetite into the equity market. But right now, what we're recommending is it's a great time to look in the beginning of the year at your portfolios. Are you where you want to be from an allocation standpoint? Has your allocation in the large cap growth, has that run up too much? Take some profits here, rebalance, and set yourself up for the next year.
How about in the world of fixed income, Megan, here? Do you sit at the U.S. Treasury 2-year at 4.25%, or do you take some credit risk and chase some extra yield?
Yeah, I don't like the credit markets specifically right now. They can stay, overbought for a significant amount of time. But when you're looking at investment grade credit spreads at less than 100 basis points, that's the most expensive we've seen in decades. So I think that people are reaching for credit risk, and that is a concern. It's been a concern for a long time, but it really is a concern as we go into an environment where the interest rate cuts that were priced in, even at the beginning of last year, didn't materialize. And I think even this year, it might be a little aggressive. So we're just, being defensive in fixed income. Don't take a lot of duration risk either, because we're seeing what's happening with the long end of the curve because of inflation.
January 15th, the earnings madness starts with JP Morgan. They'll be the banks. We'll cover it all, folks. You know the drill. Megan, what will you watch for across 2, 3, 4 weeks of earnings season? Are you focused on revenues, margins, net income? Are you focused on free cash flow?
I think margins are the biggest thing that we'll take a look at, because margins will be impacted by whether it's hiring costs, the inflation situation. Can they pass on those prices? So that's something that we'll look at. But we're also going to look at their future guidance. What do they see for 2025? Because we do think the economy is going to slow. What does that mean for their earnings expectations? Also, don't forget the labor market's a big thing, and they will talk about that. They typically do. Are they looking to hire?
Right.
Where are they looking to hire? And what is AI doing to their businesses, and how are they leveraging that? And maybe, what does that mean for the labor market?
Megan, thank you so much. Megan Horniman with Verdance. Greatly appreciated perspective this morning. Paul, we got to do this, and I don't think we've ever, I have no recollection of being this late. I believe it's January 7th.
Okay.
On my checks, I write so few checks now.
Yeah.
I'll be writing 2024 in August, but at least it's got the same problem. I got jobs on January 10.
Yes.
Late.
Yes.
And nobody's talking about it. I got 163,000 statistic. Hatzius is below that. Greifeld is speaking to Dr. Hatzius today.
I know. Now, that's going to be great. Over Goldman Sachs.
It'll be great. But they're down at like a 120-ish. And then there's, the wages and all that. The unemployment rate, 4.2%. 10 years ago, if you told me a 4.2% unemployment rate, that's nirvana.
Sure, absolutely. So we've got, it feels like, the 163,000 change in non-farm payrolls, down from last month, but still a solid number. And as you mentioned, Tom, 4.2%. Average hourly earnings on an annualized basis, up 4%. So, it's that labor market. It feels fully employed. People are talking about cracks in the labor market. We'll get some JOLTS data at 10 o'clock today. And that's back down to a reasonable, 7-8 million number.
Importantly, with the funeral for former President Carter, for Jimmy Carter, a lot of the ninth economic data, with our special coverage there, will be tomorrow. For example, claims are tomorrow with ADP.
Exactly right. We've got initial jobless claims coming in a number we've seen month after month, 215,000. Again, kind of going to the fact that this labor market, while maybe not as strong as it was 6-9 months ago, is still by all measures a very strong labor market.
The revision, I didn't even know, and Alexander Tanzi's killing it with this. The revision was plus 56,000 last month. I wonder what the revision will be this month. We'll go beneath the headline data at 8:30 on Friday. Great lineup there as well. We're working on it right now. Futures up 11. We're out on YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast. We say good frigid America on your morning commute. From New York City, warm and toasty. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Matei. We've got a little movement in futures, and this as traders look to Friday's jobs report. In the meantime, the U.S. trade deficit, that widened to $78.2 billion in November from $73.6 billion the prior month, the biggest jump in imports since March 2022, and also comes ahead of the possible dock worker strike and also anticipation of potential tariffs by the Trump administration. 10 a.m. Wall Street time, we move on to JOLTS job openings and ISM Services Index. That is your Bloomberg Business Report. Paul and Tom.
Thanks so much, Lisa. Greatly appreciate it. When you grow up the son of a fireman, you've got that irascible kind of thing. John Bolton, from the very beginning, has been someone of opinion. He's been someone who said it as clear as he can. People that are for John Bolton, his critics as well, see a distinguished career in public service. And he has been very visible in the last number of weeks on the formation of the second Trump administration cabinet. John, thank you so much for joining Bloomberg today. I'm just going to cut to the chase. Sometimes you write an essay, and then you wrote in the Wall Street Journal an essay on Mr. Patel, who is being considered to run the FBI, and line by line you went through it. Why did you put that much energy into that essay on Mr. Patel, our potential leader of the FBI?
Well, being director of the FBI is one of the most important jobs in government, and it's been held by some distinguished people and by some people who are not so distinguished. But the power in that job is just enormous, and I wanted to show why, in my view, Patel wasn't qualified, not in terms of his competence or his experience or his character. I just thought it was important for senators to have that in mind.
The senators are the key. I can state, folks, my book of the year a number of years ago, 12 years ago, 11 years ago, Garrett Graff, The Threat Matrix, the FBI at War. It is a spectacular 500 pages on the complexity of the FBI. John Bolton, do you believe that the president-elect doesn't understand the day-to-day grind of what the FBI does?
Yeah, I think Trump has very little understanding how most of the government operates. He never took the time to learn it. He didn't know much before he became president, and he didn't learn very much when he was president. The FBI has roughly, 40,000 employees. most of whom spend their time working on investigating real crimes or real threats to the United States from overseas. And the idea that you're going to unleash somebody whose main job in Trump's view is hunting down Trump's enemies really demeans the incredibly important work of the overwhelming majority of people in the department. I'm not saying the FBI is free of problems. It certainly is not. But if you want to have somebody come in and fix it, correct the problems, reform it, straighten it up, pick somebody like William Webster, who, when Ronald Reagan appointed him, was a distinguished federal judge, and has since written he doesn't think either Kash Patel or Tulsi Gabbard are fit for the jobs they've held. Pick somebody who's got a background of integrity and judgment, who's going to resolve the problems you're worried about, and not make them worse.
John, for some of the candidates or appointees that you have raised some flags on, do you believe the Senate will in fact challenge them going forward in the confirmation process?
Well, I think there's a real chance of it. You know, the idea that the president nominates somebody and that choice is automatically accepted by the Senate isn't borne out by history. I think the president's entitled to real deference in his picks, particularly in terms of what the appointees think about policies. That's what the president was elected to do. But the function of the Senate, the Federalist Papers make this very clear, is to make sure that people who lack character and competence don't get through. Now, we're all waiting after the first of the year for the FBI full field background investigations to come in. That's going to be interesting to read for the senators on the key committees. And then there are going to be confirmation hearings where if senators, Republican and Democratic, are doing their jobs, they'll ask the nominees some hard questions. This is still a long way from being over.
John, from a national security perspective, what do you think the to-do list should be for this incoming administration, maybe for the first 100 days, if not longer?
Well, I think it's a long list. I think the world is very threatening to American interest in a variety of places. Certainly the Middle East is on fire. The Russian invasion of Ukraine continues. The Chinese threat to Taiwan and the South China Sea remain. And I think there needs to be a real focus on going after those countries that have become adversaries of ours and putting in place both the policies we need to protect our interests, but also getting resources. Maybe the highest priority the president has is getting a better defense budget, a substantially larger defense budget. Not to say that there aren't savings that can be had at defense, there certainly can be. But we face threats that are rising around the world, and we've had, over a sustained period of time, inadequate resources to do the job. Our military is way overstretched, and we are vulnerable.
8 ways to go here. Joining us, folks, is John Bolton. Of course, you know him from his many years of service to America. Always controversial, always interesting and opinionated as well. In 1964 at the McDonough School, Owings Mills, Maryland, he ran the Students for Goldwater campaign.
No kidding.
You know, John, I go back to your first public service as a summer intern from the vice president from Maryland, Mr. Agnew. You've seen some White House movement away from the uproar of the first Trump administration. You were articulate about the generals, the admirals that surrounded President Trump in his first term. The military has now seen the Trump process. Can he get the same quality military advice now that he got in January 8 years ago?
Well, I think it's open to question. I think part of the Trump effect is to try and intimidate people, to prevent them from speaking out. I hope that's not the case. The military-civilian relationship is critical for our national security, and civilian leadership obviously is dominant, but it depends on getting straightforward, honest military advice. And if the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, the other Joint Chiefs, the combatant commanders continue to provide that, obviously it's up for the president to make the final decision. But they need to tell him what the facts are, whether he wants to hear them or not.
Do you think that, what is your confidence level that that will occur this second time around? Because there are some concerns out there that in the second Trump administration, he'll be more authoritative. He'll have more confidence in his moves, maybe at the expense of advice from others.
Well, I think it's very likely that will happen, but you can't tell until the rubber meets the road. We need to know who the Secretary of Defense is going to be. That's not resolved yet either, and know a lot more about what the other top civilian officials at Defense are going to look like. But I think there are going to be crises that are going to require some pretty tough politico-military decisions very early in Trump's term. We don't get to call the shots on when things in the wider world happen. It could happen on day one.
Ambassador Bolton, one final question. This is for Nick Wadhams in Washington, and it's on the machinery here. I see Iran pulling out of Syria. It's unfair to you because I guess you don't have all the present intelligence, but is it legitimate that Iran is retrenching from the greater Middle East?
Look, Iran is in deep trouble. It's been dealt punishing blows by Israel against Hamas and Hezbollah, two terrorist proxies that were major elements of Iranian power. The fall of the Assad regime in Syria is a third critical blow. I think the Ayatollahs are on the back foot now, and this is a point to press them hard. It may well be the regime itself is shaky. At the same time, we've got to worry about making sure that the new government in Syria doesn't establish a terrorist state, a kind of Afghanistan on the Mediterranean, something we need to pay a lot of attention to. We've got a lot at stake there.
John Bolton, thank you so much for joining us today. We look forward to speaking to you again, the former Ambassador John Bolton. Paul, I must say that when Ambassador Bolton's on, we get a firestorm of plus minus. He is a lightning rod.
He is.
For attention across our politics.
Yeah, but he's been in, for whatever your politics, he's been serving this country for a long time in a number of administrations.
Spiro T. Agnew.
Yeah, exactly.
He was a summer intern. That's the way he
mentioned
started.
McDonough School, great school down there in the Baltimore, D.C. area. Yep.
Yeah. John Bolton there, thank you for your comments, particularly on YouTube. Pro and con, a lightning rod for comments on the hawkish, dovish debate of our international relations. We have a lift to the market. It's a Sweeney lift. We give Paul credit today. Futures up 14, Dow futures up 121. NASDAQ behind a lesser lift today. Again, a shift. The Ed Ludlow, Jensen Huang interview, we're looking post 12 noon, maybe the 2-ish hour, under debate right now, but we will bring you that interview from Las Vegas. On your frigid commute this morning on Apple CarPlay, on Android Auto, Sirius XM, we say good morning in Washington, 99.1. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
You're listening to Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Paul Sweeney and Tom Keene. Eventful day. Equities lifting. McKee walked in the studio. Did you see that? We went futures right up 11, futures up 14. It's too much. The VIX are critically under 16, 15.96. So I was, talking the calendar there because McKee walks in the room.
Yep.
You go FOMC, go. And I got January 29, March 19, May 7, June 18 to get us out to the 4th of July. Which meeting matters to you? Which meeting matters to Jerome Powell? And don't give me this, they all matter.
Well, I think a lot of people, and I would agree that we'd be looking towards sort of May 7th in the sense that that's when baseball season is underway. And life will be a lot better. And things will be getting warmer. March 19th is going to be the next big one because it's the next S&P dot plot one. And then we get one in June, and we get one in September and December. So those are the months that people are going to look to. And March 19th is going to be actually a more important one than usual because nobody believes the December forecasts because the December forecasts were based in. Some people were talking about what Trump might do. Some people were not. And so there's a feeling that they're not grounded in whatever the reality of the economy is going to be.
Well, how about January 29th? Will they cut here or will they wait?
Right now, it appears that they're looking for an excuse to
wait.
a reason to wait. It would probably take some bad news for them to cut.
A lot of economic data this week.
Jobs report.
You hit
Come on.
Ego, go. And boy, a lot. What are you going to
January
focus on?
10?
The first week of the month is always the busiest one with data. But the timing of the jobs report always depends on how far it is from the survey week. It's published 3 weeks after the survey week. So the survey week is the week that includes the 12th, and so you get some months where it comes up the first of the month and some months where it comes up later.
It's Tuesday, and we're supposed to, talk adult economics talk. Forget about it.
Okay.
Broncos against KC. OMG.
Nah.
They're playing the Bills this weekend.
Playing the Bills this weekend, yeah.
I got my Buffalo Bills hat on my desk. And I mean, to me, it's a really exciting set of games. It kicks off, Saturday, but then Sunday, Broncos-Bills.
Well, Broncos probably are not going to win that game, and everybody's just thrilled they got into the playoffs. They played a team that was imitating Kansas City last weekend, not the real Kansas City Chiefs. But the tough part of this is all going to be the guy who usually or is often sitting in this chair, Michael Barr. What happens? What do you choose if we get Buffalo versus Detroit in the Super Bowl? Two cities that deserve perhaps to win the Super Bowl more than any other.
Good point.
I agree, and it's really, I mean, I'm not into this, folks, like McKee or Sweeney or certainly Mr. Barr. I'm riveted by it, absolutely riveted by it. Mr. Barr, a different Barr, was vice chair supervision. He goes back to being a governor, which is already was. Can Jerome Powell go back to being a governor if things get nasty?
Sure.
With President Trump?
Yes, he can. There's some legal question about whether Trump could remove him as chair, but he can't remove him as governor. And
interesting.
It looks like Trump probably won't even try that. What's the point? He's only got till May of next year. But Michael Barr stays as governor, which means that Donald Trump cannot appoint somebody to the board to replace him. He could only elevate someone who's on the board.
Interesting. Just one final question. Hatzius publishes with Miracle over at Goldman Sachs. The number's 160, what, Paul? 163-ish?
163, yeah.
We're at 120. Where's the official McKee Whisper number here? Is it too early?
It's too early. We'll get some more data, especially the ISM services data today. But at this point, we'll be looking for some kind of strength. Bloomberg Economics thinks 285,000 or something like that.
285?
And the range is very, very wide this time.
And the
People
whisper
really
number, Tom,
don't
you
know.
asked WHIS on the Bloomberg terminal, 185,000.
That'll move a lot. That always
That'll move a
moves
lot.
as we get
Okay,
the additional
okay.
data and until Friday morning.
I'm learning every day. Michael McKee, thank you so much. Las Vegas this afternoon, Edward Ludlow, Jensen Wong, after they listen to Mr. Sinatra.
Be a lady tonight. Luck, be a lady tonight. Luck, if you've ever been a lady to begin with. Luck, be a lady tonight.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
I'm sorry, it's a boom economy, and that's what we're adjusting to.
Neither party seems to want to take on deficits at all.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
Stocks are coming off of another record high.
And Michael Barr with news.
Tensions between the U.S. and China have heated up even more.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo across this frigid nation. I'll give you the temperatures here in a moment. You got to love the YouTube live chat. Thank you for being out on YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts. More Michael Bolton, less John Bolton.
Really?
I mean, there's a lot of opinions. People go either way with Ambassador
Bolton fans out there, I guess.
Bolton, thank you so much. Real terse conversation about his negative tone on some of these. We didn't even get to Ms. Gabbard.
No, did not. But I think we know where
some real opinion there. Thank you for your comments. I really appreciate the dialogue out on YouTube. Our dialogue is lifting markets. Futures, when Lisa was going like single-digit stuff, and now we're up. Futures up 17. The VIX under 16. To me, is a big tone here. Two big interviews. Ed Ludlow and Jensen Huang this afternoon now.
Yep.
And then tomorrow, Gensler. Boy, he's been a big supporter of the show. I would kill to interview Gary Gensler now. Gura gets a ticket on that.
Gura,
we'll do that.
He'll do a good job.
Tomorrow as well. Let's get right to it. Two good guests here to get us started in this 9 o'clock Wall Street time hour with our Bloomberg Business Flash from the Interactive Broker Studios, Lisa Mateo.
You got it. We have futures advancing ahead of jobs day this morning. We also had some more economic data. The U.S. trade deficit had widened on its largest jump in imports since 2022. Now, in about an hour from now, we get JOLTS job openings and ISM services index. All right, we head to NASDAQ futures up 0.2%, 44 points. Dow futures up 0.3%, 131 points. S&P futures up 18 points. The 2-year yield at 4.27%. Little change. The yield on the 10-year 4.63%, and that is little change. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index is a little change. We have Bitcoin up, down nearly 1% at just over 100,000. Shares of NVIDIA still up more than 2%. Its CEO announced a new lineup, including gaming chips, also a $3,000 desktop computer. But the big thing, also announced a partnership with Uber, and that has Uber shares up more than 2%. Later this afternoon, you got to tune in. Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow sitting down with Jensen Huang at CES in Las Vegas. A few chip stocks before we go. Micron up more than 4% and Marvell Technology up 0.5%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Lisa, thanks so much. I'd also note American oil, $74 a barrel. Have you seen, is the price of gas, has Tucker commented to you on the Wawa?
Yes, he was seeing
Lifting?
$3.
$3.
Yeah, lifting a little bit there at the Wawa on Route 36 in Jersey.
Oh, we got some 3, 2, 1. We have some intellectual firepower for you. Sorry, Evan Devitt's going to join us here in a bit with Moneta. She is just lights out and equally competent from Johns Hopkins, out of Wharton, and of course, with BNP Paribas. Daniel Morris joins us this morning. The heritage, Daniel Morris, is BNP Paribas always takes a more cautious view. What is the BNP Paribas view of American real GDP?
Well, above trend, which I think is the key issue when you think about how many investors, asset allocators are overweight the U.S., and we're talking about U.S. exceptionalism. So that's all great. You know, we had nearly 3% growth for the third quarter. I think the latest Atlanta Fed GDP now is 2.4 or so for the third. But the point to keep in mind is that it can't continue at that rate, at least if you believe the Fed. Their forecast for the long-run trend rate, potential growth rate for U.S. GDP is about 1.75. So we do need to go down. And I think the more interesting question now when we think about asset allocation is how do we get there as opposed to necessarily where we are today.
Well, that's right where I want to go. Do we get there from a jobs report? What is it, Paul? Excuse me, Wednesday, ADP and claims. Thursday, the Carter funeral. And then Friday, the jobs report. Does that help us to get out to Monday?
Well, I think it will give us an indication of kind of what is the risk that we overheat before slowing, or ideally you really would like to move back in towards that soft landing narrative that we had for last year. I mean, we do need to get back to trend and average rates, both for growth and GDP. It's just hopefully that path is relatively smooth, though more often than not it seems not to be the case.
So given that background here, Daniel, as you sit there, BNP Paribas, you're based in London, how do you think about allocation globally, regionally? Because it seems to have been even a more pronounced shift to the U.S., particularly the U.S. market.
Well, exactly, and I have to admit we have the same. We're overweight U.S. equities because really if you look at the opportunities, risk, and reward right now, the U.S. does make the most sense. But I think the key thing is to be evaluating that allocation continuously because you imagine at some point you are going to want to look potentially at the markets that have underperformed, that have lagged, and hopefully have priced in all the bad news and had that potential for upside, whereas at some point you would imagine that's going to be a lot more difficult for the U.S.
So with this Federal Reserve, we're going to get a meeting later this month here, and there's growing debate about what they will do. Do they need to cut rates, or can they pause? And how many times do they need to cut rates in 2025? Is it 1? Is it 2? Is it more than that? How do you think this Fed is viewing its role in 2025?
Well, unfortunately, they're in the same position as all of us. We really just don't know what the policies from the new Trump administration are going to be. All of them are going to have different impacts both on growth and inflation. So even if you knew what the actual policies were, working out the impacts isn't necessarily all that straightforward. But we don't even know yet. So we are, unfortunately, in this wait and see until at least January 20th. Hopefully, at that point, we can begin to assess a bit more concretely what the policy prescriptions are going to be, and then try to analyze, okay, what is going to be the impact on the markets and on growth and inflation.
Did you and your team at BNP Paribas, did you materially change your outlook in the days following the U.S. election?
We had already been overweight U.S. equities and increased the overweight following the election, but broadened it out to the S&P, whereas previously it had been more tech-focused.
What is BNP Paribas seeing anecdotally? I mean, so much of this is the media focused on what banks are doing, but it's just as important, what are the customers doing? What are you seeing from business in Paris, but frankly, with the reach all the way to China, what is BNP seeing from businesses?
I think there's, frankly, the same concerns. Even if you mentioned China, and on one hand, if you look at earnings expectations for Chinese corporates, they've been rising quite sharply. So you are starting to see the benefit from the stimulus the government has announced over the last few months. At the same time, there's all the uncertainty about what's going to happen with tariffs, and not so much necessarily what Trump might do, but what will be the reaction of the Chinese government. So that's all speculation, but we appreciate that could have a very material impact on the equity market. So we just have to wait until we have a bit more information.
Daniel, looks like if the Federal Reserve is going to be a little bit more muted this year in terms of reducing rates, it puts a little bit even more pressure on corporate earnings to come through. How do you think about the earnings picture and that as a catalyst or maybe a potential risk for this market?
Well, you always assume at the beginning of the year that analysts' expectations are too optimistic. As a rule, the year forward estimate declines over the course of the year. But that isn't in and of itself a problem as long as you have positive earnings growth in absolute terms. Now, expectations for NASDAQ are a bit over 20%. For Russell Value, it's about 12, so quite good numbers. And even if the actual numbers that we get for the year are lower than that, if they're in the double digits, markets should be happy, particularly when, if you look at valuations, particularly for NASDAQ, honestly, we don't think they're out of line or much out of line with historical averages.
Well, this is really important. You're saying buy the Mag 7?
No, we're overweight within the U.S. To equal-weighted S&P and also to NASDAQ. So we want to have exposure to growth and to NASDAQ and growth stocks, but also want to appreciate there are other parts of the market now that should benefit from the economic outlook, and so we do have the broader exposure as well.
That's a subtle distinction. Thank you so much. Dan Deal Morris with BNP Paribas from our Queen Victoria Street studios as well. Futures up 19, Dow futures up 133. The VIX nicely under 16 now. There's a mood to the market, certainly more constructive than what we saw 2 hours ago. Good morning out on YouTube as well. I can do this, Paul, on my cell phone. My kids taught me how to do this. If I bring this up and I hit that button, ready? 24 in New York, 27 in Washington, 20 in Washington. In Nuuk, Greenland,
go.
It's 27. It's warmer in Nuuk, Greenland this morning.
Wow.
Than Boston and New York.
But here's the thing. It's 24 in New York, but it feels like 9.
It was cold.
It's windy
the wind
out there.
was out there.
Yeah, and for the next 3 days, it's going to be windy.
Vet Bill just looked at me and said, forget about it.
Yeah,
he went to the other side. He went to the east wing of the house. We're in the west wing, and he went over to the east wing. This comes up. Marty emails in from Jamaica and says, please, Montego Bay, 78 degrees.
There you go.
Thank you, Marty, for letting us know about this.
Right with you next week.
This is one of my favorite people we interview. She's got prodigious academics. Even Devitt joins us now, Senior Family Office Strategist at Moneta with just a great transatlantic scope as well. Open question, Ethan, to get it started. What are you writing now to publish Friday into next week?
In terms of our outlook, well, what we've been focusing on is certainly there's a bit of flip-flopping going around all around. And whether it's flip-flopping by central banks, because they're professing to be data dependent. And as we've spoken about before, they're very wary of losing their power essentially over the narrative. And that's something that we've already seen critique thrown at the ECB as well as at the Fed, that the ECB has been too slow to stimulate the economy, and that the Fed, by being so data dependent, is now a flip-flopper. So the central banks are focusing on that. And meanwhile, markets seem to have nothing but enthusiasm for the outlook around the new Trump administration. Right. Where there was a suggestion over the weekend about some flip-flopping over tariffs there. And as you can see, the dollar moved around in quite a volatile fashion as a result.
Are we beyond the pandemic?
Well, we would like to think so, although certainly with the way we're hearing about this particular flu season, we would think that we're not beyond the pandemic, and we've heard about masking coming in, etc. In terms of the pandemic effect on markets, though, yes, we are roundly beyond the pandemic, to the point that all the excess savings that were put away during the pandemic have now been spent. So that effect is over, at least in the US. It seems not to be quite the same in Europe and Japan, etc. They seem to have a little bit of that excess savings still there. So that actually is not good news for the consumer. The fact that they have frittered away the excess savings, we talked about this revenge spending that was going on after the pandemic. That revenge spending seems to have been quite contagious. And the spending has been continuing unabated for most of the population of consumers. So I'd say we are beyond the pandemic, but we are, as Yeats would say, and I am Irish, so I'm going to quote Yeats, changed utterly.
Very good. I love that. Ethan, we saw some weakness in U.S. equity markets in December, particularly the second half of December. And I guess that was this reflection of the market saying, hey, maybe this inflation is going to be sticking around a little bit longer. Maybe even the Fed may not be cutting as aggressively as we originally thought. Yeah, we seem to kind of pop back a little bit here in the first few trading days of January. Where do you think the market expectations are right now?
Well, they were positive, and we can certainly see consumers are at record highs in terms of their enthusiasm around equity markets and where stocks are going to go. And it's quite unusual when stocks have run up this much with two back-to-back bumper years to have the enthusiasm not be a little bit maybe in check, or at least looking for reversion to the mean. No, it seems to have just built on the last 2 years and be quite optimistic. So that's where we are. Why was it negative? Well, as we can see, it's going to be a bit of a volatile ride in terms of Trump messaging. And we've already seen that, and he isn't even in office yet. So that's clearly where the cracks are, that markets don't like the uncertainty that can come from a post on Truth Social or X.
You know, and we've got John Kay coming up, of course, iconic at the FT with a whole set of books, a broad thinker like you is well. My arch theme is corporations adapt to whatever's handed to them. There's always an underestimation of corporations adapting. Let's bring it over to politics. It can be any troubled geography. I can pick China and Beijing. I can frankly pick Paris or Berlin, whatever. Do you have an optimism that corporations and political institutions will adapt?
I do, and I'd say with guidelines. I'd say that the guidelines have to be that where there is less strangling regulation, there is a greater ability to adapt and pivot quickly. And that's certainly what we've seen from the US. And I believe that's one of the key reasons why the US has broken away from other developed economies, because they've been able to adapt and pivot. And we all know that that has to come. The news cycle is shorter. We know innovation is a much shorter cycle today. Companies simply have to get ahead of. And cybersecurity is another example of the threats. So between the opportunities and the threats, they need to pivot quickly. So I am optimistic. However, I'd say that there will be some left behind. We spend a lot of time looking at a culture within companies and the culture of change. We've certainly seen politically, there is a very swift, and we saw that with Meta's 3 new board members just over the weekend, a very swift adaptation to the new regime here in the US. We've seen perhaps genuflecting at the knee of the new administration to come, and that's, I think, a sign of adaptation. Where we're also seeing adaptation very quickly is around DEI and some of those policies being really left by the wayside by some very big names, less so by others. But I'd say, yes, adaptation is critical. As you would say, only the paranoid survive, so it is critical to adapt.
So, Ethan, we've had technology broadly leading this market for the longest time, and over the last 2-3 years, it's been the AI trade here. Do you expect that tech leadership to remain? If not, where would you be looking?
I do think the leadership will remain. I don't think that means that the other, say, 493 stocks will be left behind. AI and its ripple effects are going to be felt all year. We've already seen that. And we can see that it's likely to happen in areas, some of the old economy stocks and areas such as healthcare. We know defense spending is likely to be boosted by the new administration. So that's a sector that might have lagged and will get some boost. But yes, it will be about tech because that's simply where the narrative is, where the momentum is, and how the US is sustaining its breakaway status. So there will be some mixed fortune in there. And we've seen that with Tesla, certainly, around some revenues and other demand factors. And certainly tariffs will have a knock-on effect. As well as antitrust measures. But I think it will still be a leader. It would be voting or at least voting with your feet or acting against tech peril at this stage.
Ethan, I got to ask the question. I've been asking it all morning of every guest. Knowing her, yes. Have you been to Nook, Greenland? Have you in your travels, Ethan Devitt, been to Greenland?
That has not been on my. I've been to Iceland, but no, not Greenland. And I heard you saying it was warmer than some of the North American and the Northeast. Chicago's pretty chilly this morning too, I'll say.
We're learning. Thank you so much. Ethan Devitt, every time you're with us, we learn. She is with Moneta. Really can't say enough about her. Let's get right to it with futures up 18. The market open in 12 minutes with our news in New York City. Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. U.S. airlines are playing catch-up today as this week's winter weather has led to thousands of flight cancellations and delays. Kathleen Bangs is with the flight tracking company FlightAware.
What we saw were over 4,000 flights canceled Sunday and Monday, and delayed flights almost up to 20,000. That sounds like a lot. We've had winter storms, however, where they were far worse, but this is definitely the most impactful that we've seen so far this winter season.
FlightAware's Kathleen Bang says today winds are going to be gusting potentially up to 45 or 50 miles an hour, slowing down ground operations. Meanwhile, bitter cold will hit the southern U.S. today. The body of former President Jimmy Carter today arrives in Washington, D.C., where he will lie in state at the U.S. Capitol until Thursday's state funeral at the Washington National Cathedral. Vice President Harris today will deliver a eulogy at a ceremony at the U.S. Capitol today for the arrival. President Biden will deliver a eulogy at Carter's state funeral on Thursday. A strong earthquake shook a high-altitude region of western China and areas of Nepal. Today's quake damaged hundreds of houses, littered streets with rubble, and killed at least 95 people in Tibet. At least 130 others were hurt. Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg has announced some big changes to Facebook, Instagram, and Threads. The changes include moving the company's trust and safety team from California to Texas in an effort to address the concern that biased employees are over-censoring content.
The reality is that this is a trade-off. It means we're going to catch less bad stuff, but we'll also reduce the number of innocent people's posts and accounts that we accidentally take down.
Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg also says his companies will work with President Trump to push back against foreign governments going after American companies to censor more. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it. With Bloomberg News Now, I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Thanks so much, Michael Barr. Appreciate it. I want to touch on this. I was trying to do it yesterday, and the news flow was just nuts. The single best chart of our childhoods. I remember the whole fam going to Mary Poppins in 1960, whatever, and my father was in a panic because I think it cost over $20. You know, between all the kids and
had to be
popcorn
1964.
And, yeah, way back, way back. Good morning, Dick Van Dyke, off his wonderful birthday.
100.
Paul Sweeney, Lucas Shaw had a chart of movie theater attendance, and basically, other than the blockbusters, the movies are dead. Am I right?
Movies are at a new pre-pandemic. About 11 million people will go see in North America, and that's pretty steady. That grows about 1 or 2% a year. Then the pandemic. Now they're about 9 million, and they're trying to build back to that 11 million, which people think maybe on a run rate basis, end of next year, probably 2026 before they get back to that pre-pandemic level.
Did you just look at the system that you lived, that it's just going to break or snap at some point?
It's just evolving like crazy. The cable package, which had been the backbone of the entertainment business for 50 years.
Did you see Moffett and Nathanson 2 days ago?
Yeah, basically just threw
Blistering.
in the towel. Yeah,
blistering.
threw in the towel.
We're efforting Craig Moffett and Michael Nathanson.
To the best.
Their people are trouble. I mean,
These guys are in high demand.
You
They're
call
rock
up
stars.
Daniel Morris at BNP Paribas, and they speak French, and they're giving us croissant and all that. Moffett Nathanson, they won't come out unless we do Yankee baseball.
Yep.
I mean, it's that bad. We'll have to see. Futures up 17. Stay with us. Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And this futures report sponsored by IBKR with Interactive Brokers Forecast Trader. You can trade your views on key political, economic, and climate indicators. Visit IBKR.com/forecast and get started today. All right, we've got a little bit of a lift to the markets. We have the Dow futures leading the gains up about 0.3%, 135 points. We have S&P futures up 0.2%, 17 points, and NASDAQ futures up 0.1% or 35 points. The 2-year yield at 4.27%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year 4.63%. And that is little changed as well. Over to commodities, and I miss crude, $74 a barrel. We have Brent crude, $76 a barrel, and spot gold higher at $2,660 an ounce. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index is little changed. Few companies making news. We'll start with Southwest Airlines monetizing its fleet, gaining $92 million from selling and leasing back 35 of its Boeing 737-800 aircraft. Then some deal-making news. Yes, it's official. Paychex is buying rival payroll processor Paycor for about $4.1 billion in cash, including debt. You have Paychex up about 2%, Paycor down about 3%. And finally, Cintas, that's the maker of workplace products. Well, it has confirmed, an offer to buy smaller uniform supplier, UniFirst, $275 a share. UniFirst up about 40%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mateo. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Lisa, thanks so much. I have been waiting for this. Joining us now, Vice Chair, Churchill Asset Management. Boy, does he talk straight when he walks in the studio. Randy Schrimmer with us now on what Paul calls private credit. I still really don't know what it is. Gurr is talking to Gensler tomorrow. And I'm going to say my good friend Gary Gensler sort of opened up small investment in Bitcoin and all that. There are rumblings, including in Apollo, that the mere mortals like Lisa Mateo and Tom Keene, not hitters like Sweeney, ought to be able to buy into private credit and private equity in their retirement plans.
Yeah.
What say you?
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. And as we all march towards that time when we are going to be accessing our retirement plans, look, what's happening, and this is the next generation of private credit, is okay, great. Institutional investors have access to that. What about us retail investors? How can we get access to that? And that's basically where all the attention is being paid, certainly at Churchill and Nuveen, our parent company.
Who's going to do the due diligence?
Right. Well, managers are being paid to do the due diligence. So we're the ones who are investing ourselves, our own personal money, our own parent company money into these businesses. We've been doing this for 20 years. And all of the deals that we're doing, our parent company, which is AAA investor, TIAA, the ultimate parent, is investing right alongside those retail investors.
It's going to be the triple leveraged Schwimmer fund.
I know.
Yeah.
I know. You got to
ETF.
Private credit. Lisa Mateo's newscast just now, 2 M&A deals, and we're hearing more and more of that. Lisa's reporting more and more M&A activity. It's out there, isn't it?
Yeah, what's interesting is, and I always like to come with stats with you guys, right? So here's one for you. So the leveraged loan market record volume last year, 1.4, I think it's $1.5 trillion. But interestingly, of that, only $81 billion was for new LBO activity. That's only 5%. This is the large bank liquid market, right? Compare that with our business, and generally the top lenders in private credit, the non-banks, 90% of our deal volume was dedicated to LBO activity, new deal activity. So yeah, the large corporate market, which has been open all year and was continue to be open, will still do larger deals. You know, the very large jumbo transactions, particularly the non-private equity backed, deals that are large corporate, quasi-investment grade, double B kind of things. Those are fair game for the banks, and they're doing it. But increasingly, the activity for the new LBO activity is still in the non-banks. And right now, I think we ourselves have like a $2 billion pipeline of transactions that we expect to close in the first quarter, and it's only January 8th or whatever it is. So
I'm going to get the stock market open here. We're going to do that in a minute and a half. Are you a stock market bull? I mean, there's the big theme, American exceptionalism, and we've got Ed Ludlow talking to Jensen. Could you see Randy with a leather coat?
Sure.
I've got one. Definitely try that
do
out.
the Jensen. Look, are you a stock market bull?
Look, here's the thing. Here's the
side?
thing that's interesting. The valuations on the public side have outpaced the valuations on the private side. That's actually good news for our market, because what buyers are looking for, a little bit of a bargain, right? So they're looking in the middle market where valuations are, like probably 2 times EBITDA less in the smaller companies. So the opportunity as a buyer, because that's what we're always looking at, buy low, sell high, are probably better in the private market. It's hard to sort of, as a public market, to get in front of that engine, because it seems like it's a pretty strong one. But for buyers, the private market is definitely activity. The activity level's up and running.
My puny brain, I'll try to remember the great question I got to come back with Randy Schwimmer, here, Vice Chair, Churchill Asset Management. Paul's all over this, private equity, private credit. You mentioned the M&A things percolating.
Yeah, it is.
It is. But what's funny is, I'm a teacher, right? I came to you with 3 lessons that I learned for 2024. Okay?
Let's come back with it. Randy Schwimmer with us right now. It is the bell of the New York Stock Exchange, Lisa Mateo with a look.
And we'll start with the S&P 500 right now. It's up about 0.3%, 21 points, 5,997. We go to the Dow, up 0.3%, 147 points at 42,855. And finally, over to the NASDAQ, up about 0.3%, 72 points at 19,940. We'll check in with the 2-year yield, 4.27%, little change. The yield on the 10-year, 4.64%, and that is little change as well. We have Brent crude, $77 a barrel, WTI crude, $74 a barrel, and spot gold at $2,660 an ounce. Bitcoin just above 100,000 at the open. Got to check in with the chip stocks because they're riding high again. We have Nvidia up more than 2% and Micron up 4%. That's your Bloomberg opening bell report. Paul and Tom.
Ed Ludlow with Nvidia here in the afternoon hours. We're guessing 2 p.m. A little bit fluid.
It tends to be fluid in Vegas. All things tend to be a little fluid.
Mr. Schwimmer was talking about 3 ideas. Randy Schwimmer with us. With Churchill.
3 ideas that I came away with. Number 1, high rates did not derail the economy last year. Didn't derail consumer spending. Didn't derail corporate growth. Didn't derail market activity. So that was interesting. The second thing I learned was that even in a slow M&A market, the public and private lending markets had record activity. What's going to happen in 25? We believe M&A activity is going to be up. So we've already seen, I think it was B of A came out with a report saying that event-driven transactions will be up 23% for 25. So if you have now tailwind in M&A, I think it's going to be an even better year for 25.
Where do they come up with that number?
23%.
There's 3 guys working all weekend to come up with that. They're 28 years old. They're wearing the fleece. They got the Damien look. They're wearing the fleece. 20-some%.
Yeah, and here's the third fact I learned. What's the population of Nook, Greenland? Do you guys have a guess?
I heard 2 numbers today. I got 20,000 and 56,000.
Yeah, 20,000. It makes a little blow up.
But that's downtown Nook.
Yeah.
Let's go buy it. It's a deal. So Randy, at Churchill Asset Management, you guys provide private credit solutions to your clients. Your clients oftentimes are private equity companies.
Correct.
What are they saying about 2025? Are they, if taxes are going to be lower and regulations are going to be lower, it's got to be they got to be really optimistic.
Yeah, here's what they're saying. They're saying the macro concerns that we had in January of 24, when I was here a year ago, are off the table now. So rates, we know the rate direction. The economy is going to be good. Inflation's going to be under control. You're seeing you guys have reported on this, jobs are going to be okay. So the macros are off the table. The issues today are more related to tariffs, taxes, geopolitical. Hard to kind of figure out where those are going. But, my sense is that with the macros off the table now, we're going to have a better 25.
Randy, thank you so much. I believe stranger. Really love having you in here. It's a private credit with Churchill Asset Manager. Look for the ETF coming up soon.
Yes, I know. How great will that be?
We'll have to see this thing.
ETF for Bitcoin, why not private credit?
Well, I mean, what do? You extrapolate BitDog out to 180,000 or 160? I don't hear anybody saying that, but why not?
Supply and I view it as a commodity, supply and demand.
I mean, the YouTube live chat feed. I mean, it's like the show ended with Greifeld.
Yeah.
They're all talking about Gus the horse.
Yep. Massive
the
horse,
crypto.
by the way.
Yeah, but the crypto. The crypto work she's doing on the open. She's on air right now. She's competing against us.
I'm not getting up on that horse.
I don't know what's about that. Thank you, Katie Dreifeld, for attending as well. Alex Steele's schedule. We've got a giant coming up is here. I'm going to take 50 seconds here to talk about this with the market up 174 Dow points. There are people that you hang on and learn from for decades. This is a special January treat for America. We have coming up John Kay, one of my heroes. He's affiliated with Oxford, but what he's really affiliated with is thinking about business and corporations. And I'm just thrilled that he could join us here to get us started for 2025. So that's a real treat. Stay with us on YouTube and across all of the nation. A lift to the market here. NASDAQ not participating. The Dow up 163 points. The VIX 16.01. On a frigid America, on Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, Good Morning Washington and Boston. On YouTube, subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Wall Street seeing some small moves. This is ahead of the jobs report later this week. Right now, leading the charge is the Dow, up 0.4%, 204 points. The S&P 500 up 0.1%, 9 points. The Nasdaq just dipping down right now, down 0.1%, 28 points. We have the 2-year yield, 4.27%, little changed. The yield on the 10-year, 4.63%, and that is little changed. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index, that's little changed as well. Tom mentioned NVIDIA, so let's get right to it. Those shares down down about 0.2%. Shares of WeChat owner Tencent, Tesla battery supplier CATL, they fell after the Pentagon labeled them and others as, quote, Chinese military companies. And then you have shares of Getty Images up 34%. This is after it said it agreed to buy Shutterstock in a deal that would create a combined company worth $3.7 billion, including debt. We have Shutterstock up about 19%. And prices for used timepieces, well, they fell last year. The Bloomberg Subdial Watch Index, its lowest since 2021. Popular Rolex models dropped 5%. Patek Philippe fell about 4%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Is my Swatch holding value?
No, that too, down.
Swatch is down as well. Thank
no.
you. Good to know as well. We say good morning to all of you. And some people go, well, you know, how do you do this? Well, you listen over the years, and particularly within the United Kingdom and a different economics, and here to people like Meghan Desai at LSE or up at work, Robert Skidelsky, one of our giants. Lord Layard was very kind as well. And then within the cross to journalism, there's a guy named Martin Wolf at the FT, and you would read, Paul, John Kay. And usually you'd be forced to reread it.
Gotcha.
You know, it was like heavy lifting. We are thrilled to start the year with one of the great academics, of course, with the University of Oxford and always forever associated with the Financial Times. John Kay joins us. The new book is The Corporation in the 21st Century. John Kay, thank you so much for joining us. My great theme here is the distrust in America of corporations, and to me, it's the monopsony of it all, the combination, the inevitable transactions that lead to corporate power. Where are we on the cycle of capitalism in terms of the ever greater power of our corporations?
I think we're not in a good place, but I wouldn't put as much emphasis as you do on the greater power of corporations. The greater power of the corporate sector, yes. But the greater power of corporations, people exaggerate people exaggerate the permanence of dominance of industries. It's quite amusing to watch at the moment the death throes, in effect, of traditional US steel, which was, when it was formed a century ago, the larger, by far the most valuable corporation in the world. You were talking earlier about NVIDIA, everyone's favorite of the moment. It's quite hard for me to see how that dominance can be maintained for long enough to justify the $3.7 trillion market cap they've achieved. And of course, the great corporation of the first half of the 20th century was General Motors, which doesn't even dominate the world automobile industry.
John Kay, how do you determine when to get off the bandwagon? How do you determine when to exit Generous Motors? How do you determine when to exit maybe British Telecom? How do you determine when to exit NVIDIA?
It's almost when there's no one left to be convinced. I have a strong memory of early 2000 and going to that Davos conference of the international business elite then. And that was at the peak of the dot-com boom. And I thought, there is no one left to be convinced that this is a permanent change. And I thought, that's a signal that this is the top. And of course, it was. Within 2-3 months of that, the great dot-com.
Do you feel that now?
Over.
Do you feel that now about AI?
I do feel that about AI. I mean, AI is important and will change. And indeed, back in 2000, I was unduly skeptical about the impact that the internet would have on business. But the impact it had on business was not an impact in 2001 and 2002. It was the impact that we're still gradually seeing as online retailing and online information acquisition took over. My life has been changed a lot by the internet, but it's over 20 years, not over 2.
John, generations of managers, executives, board members, investors have been brought up in this concept of the responsibility of a corporation is to maximize shareholder value. Is that still the case in your mind?
What's the case in my mind is that the responsibility of executives of a corporation is to build great businesses. The truth is, if we're saying, how do you maximize shareholder value, which is a product of the profits the business will earn over even a pessimistic view, 20, 30 years, on an optimistic view, 50 or to 100 years. No one can do that kind of sum. What executives should be doing is building great businesses, and then shareholder value will follow from that. That's the story of Boeing, which is a good illustration of the problem in the second half of the 20th century. What we saw was Boeing with Bill Allen, who was CEO for Boeing for a time, said we live to eat, breathe, and sleep the world of aeronautics.
Right.
That was what we did. And they built a great business with planes that revolutionized the aviation industry and everyone's lives. From 2000, they took a rather different view. Harvey Stonecipher famously said, people say this is a great engineering business. It is a great engineering business, but people invest in a company because they want to make money. Well, for a time they did make money, but they traded, in effect, the reputation of the company for short-term monetization.
John Kay,
actually, we see a lot of private equity people doing just that today.
We have to leave it there, John Kay, but thank you so much for joining us. The book is The Corporation in the 21st Century. I can't say enough about its thought-provoking tone, why almost everything we are told about business is wrong. John Kay, and we'll look for that book in the coming weeks. The Dow up 136 points with our news in New York City. Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom. Paul, Lisa. The nation bids farewell to former President Jimmy Carter. He will lie in state in Washington before being laid to rest later this week. For the past 3 days, nearly 23,000 people came to pay their respects at the Carter Center in Atlanta as his body lay in repose. People held signs that said he was a great human being and humanitarian. President Biden was in New Orleans to meet with the families of those killed in last week's terror attack. Speaking to reporters aboard Air Force One, White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre said the administration is helping the city increase security for major events in the coming weeks, including Mardi Gras and the Super Bowl.
The Biden-Harris administration has determined that these significant events require extensive federal interagency support, and we will use every tool available to fill local capability shortfalls to assure safe and secure events.
A grim discovery at a Florida airport. JetBlue says 2 people were found dead in the landing gear compartment on a jet at the airport at Fort Lauderdale, Florida, during a routine inspection. The airline says the plane had most recently operated as Flight 1801 out of New York's JFK Airport. Social media giant Meta announced significant rollbacks of its content moderation policies, including the termination of its third policy fact-checking program in the U.S. Today's move comes after founder and CEO Mark Zuckerberg said it had been hard working with the U.S. government on maintaining what he calls the integrity of his platforms.
I started building social media to give people a voice. I gave a speech at Georgetown 5 years ago about the importance of protecting free expression, and I still believe this today. But a lot has happened over the last several years. There's been widespread debate about potential harms from online content. Governments and legacy media have pushed to censor more and more.
Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Michael Barr, thank you so much. Joining Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney today at 11 o'clock scheduled is the President-elect of the United States. Have you prepared your questions?
Oh, we're all set to go. 11 a.m.
A press conference.
Yep.
With President-elect Trump.
We will take that live, Tom.
Well, we have to.
When he
absolutely.
speaks.
Yeah, he's been a bit quiet, I would say. Talk yesterday about the Washington Post and tariffs, but there'll be any number of themes, and we'll have to see. President-elect Trump, a news conference at 11 a.m. You will hear that on Bloomberg Radio and on YouTube as well. The Dow up 113 points from New York City. Bloomberg surveillance.
You're listening to Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everybody. The president-elect coming up with a press conference. Alex Steele will bring that to you at 11 a.m. with Paul Sweeney. And we're thrilled that she could come in a little early today. Usually her entourage doesn't let her in until this early. You were at Northwestern University.
Oh, boy.
Doing theater. What were you doing? Studying hydrocarbons on the side?
Not even close. That was also a long time ago, Tom. And then I came to New York and I directed some theater, and then look at this. Now I know things about oil.
Now you know things about oil. I think one of the great things at $70 a barrel is everybody's gloom and doom on oil, and I look at Exxon, it really hasn't pulled back all that much.
Well, I feel like Exxon is a unique situation because of its acquisition of Pioneer and the acreage that it gives it, and its real boost it gives it within the Permian. They also are leaders in Guyana along with Hess and CNOOC. But, you know, the Chevron question, Chevron's trying to buy Hess, Exxon's trying to block it, but Exxon has the juice in Guyana, and you can't beat those two things.
Just because of time here, what does Mr. Buffet think about Occidental? What in God's name is he doing?
Right, because everyone thinks he's going to buy it. Why would he want to buy it? I don't know. You tell me. Would he want to buy it? Okay,
he's got a lot of cash.
He got a lot of cash. So Occidental, which technically now is known as Oxy, by the way, just the cool kids know it that way. So Oxy
we quote Anaconda Copper in here.
Oh, okay. All right.
Accidental.
So Oxy is run by Vicky Holub. It is an E&P here in the U.S. Yes, Warren Buffett owns a lot of it. He helped finance its acquisition of, potential acquisition of Anadarko. And they're also doing a lot of direct air capture, which is super cool technology. Direct air capture, suck carbon out of the air and store it. And they're one of the leaders in that. It's very expensive. It's very expensive. They do have some agreements with like Amazon, the price. I have no idea what the price is, but it was hard to get to that price.
Right.
So Warren Buffett has some hooks into all of those things.
Stock for Occidental Petroleum.
Oxy.
Down 13% over the past 12 months.
Gray hair, no gray hair. Okay, that's it.
Well, that's because I have Dina, and Dina helps with the gray hair part.
Really?
So
we don't have Dina, do we?
Yeah, you don't have Dina. I have Dina. So Oxy definitely one to watch. But the question is, like, why does he keep buying it? Is he going to buy the whole company? That's definitely always something that's kicking around in the zeitgeist.
You've got ISM data here coming up in 3 minutes.
Yep.
I mean, it's actually like serious economic data.
This is services. This is a big deal. But manufacturing has been the part of the economy that's actually been improving and doing relatively well. So I wonder what the services will wind up telling us, particularly on the employment front. Remember, guys, that ISM manufacturing employment fell a little bit. Do we see something similar in services?
I have to ask, because we've asked every guest today, have you been to Greenland? Everybody else is all of a sudden going to Greenland. Paul's been to Iceland.
Yeah.
I guess a leg up there.
Yeah, I want to go to Iceland.
Reykjavik.
Yeah. But Greenland's like really cold, right?
It's warmer today in Nuuk, Greenland, than it is in New York or Washington.
Really?
Yeah.
With or without wind chill? That's the key.
No, the wind chill's the key thing.
It's the key
They don't
thing.
have wind in Greenland.
No, I have not been to Greenland, and I don't think I'm going to be going anytime soon.
I said this to start the show. It's closer to New York than it is to Copenhagen. I would have never guessed that.
Really?
Yes, that's what the...
I didn't know that either. The things you learn. This is why we need surveillance.
Well, no, we have morning interns,
points.
just because we've got the 3 or 4 interns that we have. And one of them, I said, I sent him a note at 9 p.m. last night. He was in a bar somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, research Greenland, and they make me smarter.
Wait, you
at
have
3 a.m.
interns?
We have interns,
Oh, yeah, whole team.
Great.
I don't have interns. I only have Dina. I don't want interns at the end of
Alex
the day.
Steele and Paul Sweeney to get you through the hour. Very importantly, in 1 hour, we hear from the president-elect at press conference from Mar-a-Lago. And then this afternoon, Edward Ludlow. Is Ludlow going to wear a black leather jacket? I mean,
I don't know. I mean, he's going to be in Vegas. You got to be careful.
In Vegas. We've doing a Vegas thing today. Huge response. We had Katy Perry earlier, and then Frank came on. You got to do, the Rat Pack and all that for Vegas. Right now, we've got the Dow up 190, a flip from yesterday. NASDAQ actually a bit red. The VIX 16.13. I'm watching the yield space as well. We've got that important economic data in 1 minute. We're on YouTube. We say thank you for your attendance on YouTube today. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.